Hello curious people, today I am here to help you. I know you are using this video to help you fall asleep. So before you like this video and subscribe to the channel, tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Make yourself comfortable now. I stepped into the stories. My name is Harvey Walsh, a name I cling to these days as proof that I remain unchanged, human. Everyone around me seems different now, despite their constant insistence that it's all in my head. Something changed one day, yet somehow didn't. You might think I'm going crazy from all the pills I was taking, but I stopped those a while ago. They didn't help my problem. They only made it worse. It started small, tiny inconsistencies in the world around me, like watching a familiar movie where the dialogue was slightly off. My neighbor Tom would water his lawn at exactly 7:43 every morning, his movements following the same arc, down to the precise bend of his wrist. The barista at my local coffee shop began drawing identical patterns in every latte, perfect spirals that never varied. These were little things, easy to dismiss, until they weren't. Watching my neighbors and coworkers is like observing people rehearsing how to be themselves. Their gestures and speech carry a touch too much deliberation, like actors perfecting roles they don't quite understand. The rawness of it makes my skin crawl, but who can I tell when everyone around me has become a perfect replica of themselves? Then came the dreams. No, nightmares. Even that word fails to capture their weight. They began last month. And now, whenever I close my eyes for more than a minute, my body betrays me. It's as if someone flips a switch, and I'm out. Even when I fight to stay awake, my consciousness slips away the moment my eyelids drop. I jerk awake, drenched in sweat, the sheets twisted around me like restraints. Tonight was no different. I forced myself to stay awake, but it didn't matter. When I opened my eyes, I found myself back on that train, the 8:43 to downtown. The familiar unease crept in as I looked around at my fellow passengers, some reading news, others absorbed in their phones, a few waiting listlessly for their stops. Until it started. A sound erupted, a scream, visceral and raw, echoing through the train's walls. It was agonizing and distorted, like nails scraping across a blackboard, but emanating from human mouths. The passengers collapsed in unison, their screams matching the first. Bodies jerked and slumped, limbs moving like tangled puppets on invisible strings. The lights flickered and died. In the darkness, I could hear them. Wet sliding noises and stiff, unnatural creaks that shouldn't come from human joints. The sounds were rhythmic, precise, like an assembly line at work. When the lights returned, they were back in their seats, perfectly still. Their heads snapped upright with a sound like splintering wood, eyes facing forward, until they turned. Their eyes. God, their eyes. Each iris held a tinge of gold and red, like a solar eclipse painted on flesh. They didn't blink. They didn't move. Their heads remained perfectly still as their eyes tracked me. A woman 3 seats ahead had her arm bent backward at an impossible angle. It hung there until it snapped into place with a stiff, awful crack. I woke up gasping, but the horror clung to me. Their eyes followed me into the waking world. I began seeing flashes of them, golden red rings, in reflections, in mirrors, windows, even in the blank screen of my phone. Always watching, always present, just for a moment before vanishing. I went to Dr. Lyra because I had nowhere else to turn. Simple tasks had become mountains. I couldn't function. She diagnosed it as stress and prescribed pills that made the world blur around the edges. Not my vision, but my mind. Reality itself seemed smudged, painted over with something more perfect. When I stopped taking them, I thought it was over. But the world sharpened, too much. Colors became richer, sounds crisper. Everything carried a weight that felt unnatural. Beneath it all, I started hearing things. Soft, stiff creaks when people moved. The faint click-click of pupils adjusting to light. During my last appointment, Dr. Lyra's face lingered too long in a smile, as though she'd forgotten to stop. "How are the pills working, Harvey?" she asked, her tone breezy but flat. Her voice echoed strangely in the room, hollow like a metal chamber. When I told her I wasn't taking them anymore, her expression froze. Everything stopped, not just her face, but the room itself. For a fraction of a second, I swear I saw her flicker, like a TV losing signal. Then she resumed, too quickly. Her voice piled on top of itself as her smile stretched wider than humanly possible. "That's great news, wonderful progress, but I think you should keep taking them, just a little longer, for safety." Her hands trembled as she shoved another bottle into my hands, and I saw something moving beneath her skin, as if her veins were alive and rearranging themselves. I should have listened, but I didn't. That's when I started noticing changes everywhere. The old corner store, once grimy and cluttered, gleamed with impossible cleanliness. The cashier, Mrs. Chen, always so grumpy and loud, stood behind the counter wearing an empty smile. Her head tilted exactly 15 degrees as she rang up my items. Then I saw the cat. It sat by the road, perfectly still. Too still. Its posture was rigid, unnatural. When I approached, reaching out despite my instincts, its fur felt wrong. Too smooth, synthetic, like plastic fibers pretending to be real hair. Its head turned in sharp, stiff increments, click, 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 and its eyes, those golden red rings, like camera shutters adjusting their focus. My breath caught, and the cat bolted, its movements precise and segmented. I ran home and haven't left since. From my window, I watch, and I see it all. My neighbor's movements are too synchronized, their routines perfect. Mrs. Peterson waters her flowers at exactly 9:17 a.m. Children play jump rope in flawless rhythm. Even their laughter stops and starts at precise intervals, as if on cue. Whatever is happening, I need to figure it out before it gets to me. Am I going crazy? Am I being paranoid? The logical part of my brain screams that none of this is possible, but I've seen too much to trust logic anymore. A knock at my door broke through my thoughts. 3 precise taps, evenly spaced. Peering carefully from the corner of my window, relief washed over me as I recognized the visitors. My parents stood on the porch, wearing worried expressions that didn't quite reach their eyes. Of course, I hadn't been making my usual calls. I let them in, and they slipped into their roles. Mother nagging about my self-care, father heading to the kitchen with bags they'd brought. My mom switched to that gentle voice she'd always use when I was upset. Maybe this was what I needed after my self-imposed isolation. Maybe it was all just in my head. After all, I couldn't be wrong about my own parents. I felt warmth emanating from her as she held my hands, though something about her touch felt rehearsed. My dad was laughing in the kitchen, joking about what I'd been doing all this time. I finally felt relaxed, experiencing peace I hadn't known in weeks. Mom let me doze in her lap, just like when I was small. Her hand stroked my hair in perfect metronomic motions. Dad came in and saw me half asleep. He went to the cabinet and retrieved something. Through my drowsy haze, I saw Mom's smile shift, becoming more like Dr. Lyra's, more like Mrs. Chen's, more like the cat's mechanical grin. She held my head still as Dad pressed that familiar pill to my lips. "Just take your medicine, dear," she whispered, her voice harmonizing with mechanical undertones. "Everything will be clearer once you stop fighting it." As darkness began to take hold, I heard snippets of their conversation. But the voices, no, it couldn't be. Why are we still keeping this one? My mother's voice had lost all warmth, becoming clinical and detached, layered with whirring sounds. "Mum, an experiment more or less," my father's voice replied, but the familiar deep tone held none of its usual affection. The longest-lasting subject yet. Fascinating how he senses something's wrong, but can't quite grasp what. Before my vision finally dimmed, I saw her face above me, frozen in that too wide smile. Her eyes rotated, those golden red rings locking onto me. I tried to fight the darkness, but I know it's too late. It always was. Note found scratched into the bedside table, unseen. Don't take the pills. I saw the spirit that haunts the fog by the Everest Christmas tree farm. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles turning as white as the surroundings were. I had taken this route so many times before, but tonight seemed different. Maybe it was that I was alone this time. Maybe it was because the fog was thicker than I had ever seen it. All this, coupled with the snow, it made it so much worse to try and see anything. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I tried to ignore the feeling and continued on. I was always a bit stubborn, and I was determined to make it home with my prize. Before it got even harder to see, I pushed forward, ignoring the little voice in my head telling me to turn back. I had to get back home with the damn tree. Every year it was tradition to go to the Everest Christmas tree farm and get a tree for the family. I lived the closest, but I really did not like going. I was not sure why, but I just did not like the place. Something unnerved me about it since I was a kid. Unfortunately, I was the only one who could get the tree back to my parents' place this time. Because of the snow and the timing, I had to go alone. What was worse is that I was late leaving work, and it was the last day to get the tree and trim it before Christmas. I would be lucky to get there in time before they closed. Though I admit I was a bit scared for some reason going alone. I was thankful that my family was not with me in this blizzard. If something happened, it would just be me who suffered. I made a bit more progress, but my heart sank as I heard a terrible sound coming from the engine. My car suddenly sputtered and came to a halt. The engine had died. I let out a frustrated sigh and checked my phone, but there was no signal. I was completely alone, stranded on an icy, deserted road in the middle of the night. I stepped out of my car and into the freezing fog, the cold and damp air wrapping around me like a shroud. I could barely see a few feet in front of me, and the only sound was the crunch of ice and snow underfoot. I started walking, hoping to find a phone signal or at least a house where I could ask for help. This area was sparsely populated, and even if someone's house was here, I could barely see it in the haze of white and fog. I thought I might not be too far away from the tree farm, but could not be sure. The fog seemed to grow even thicker as I walked, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I trudged on, my thoughts began to drift to memories of my past, memories of the years I had come here before. I started feeling a strange sense of dread. I remembered every year we would arrive. We would always look at the trees closest to the farm. It was a large farm, and plenty of trees were available. But I always looked near a taller hill than the back of the farm, and saw larger trees beyond. The ones further back were technically part of the tree farm as well, but my parents always told us not to go that far back. We could get lost in the tall, densely packed trees. I shuddered as I started to see tall trees in the path, and I remembered vague details about a certain year. My brother and I did not listen to the rule, and went to go play in the trees near the hill. I remembered getting lost. My brother and I got separated, and then I saw something in the trees I could not recall. All I could remember was it scared me. I pushed the memory aside and focused on the present. I walked on and saw the snow-covered sign indicating Everest Christmas Tree Farm. I had made it, and I thought maybe if they were still open, they could help me get a tree and get help to fix my car. I walked up to the main building where they normally sold the pre-prepared trees, and to my dismay, I saw no one around. I looked by the adjacent house and around the grounds of the farm, and did not see anyone. There were not even any parked vehicles in the driveway, and I was starting to worry that the place was abandoned and everyone had left somewhere. I slumped my shoulders and tried to decide if I should keep looking or try someplace else. It was getting even colder, and I could not stay out here all night to wait. As I considered what to do, I noticed the freezing fog begin to thicken and intensify, and it seemed to be following me specifically. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper in the fog. It sounded like my name, and it made my blood run cold. I stopped in my tracks and looked around, but I couldn't see anyone. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, but the feeling of being watched only intensified. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding faster with each step. The fog seemed to be closing in on me, as if it was trying to swallow me whole. I could feel the panic rising in my chest, and I just wanted to get out of there. I started running past the main buildings and through rows of frosted trees. It was chasing me. The fog forced me to press on, and I got to the edge of the main farm grounds and saw the ghostly images of trees standing silent on the hill above. I stopped and felt an irrational wave of terror course through me. I did not want to go up that hill into the tall trees beyond. Something was out there, some half-remembered horror that I could not recall. I looked behind me and thought I might have escaped the nebulous grasp of the frigid fog. But then I saw a figure emerge from the vapors surrounding the trees on the hill. It was a woman, dressed in a tattered white dress, her dark hair hanging in tangled strands around her face. She had a serene and otherworldly beauty, but there was something unsettling about her. I realized that what terrified me was that I remembered her face. All of the sudden, I felt like a child again. I tried to turn and run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen in place, unable to look away from the woman. She seemed to float towards me, her feet not even touching the ground. As she got closer, I could see that her eyes were black and empty, and a chill ran down my spine. She stopped in front of me and whispered my name again, her voice like a soft hiss. I finally found my voice and managed to stammer out, "Who are you?" The woman just smiled, a hauntingly beautiful smile, and pointed up the hill. I felt a cold hand grip my heart, and I could feel the fear consuming me. I had always been skeptical of ghosts and the supernatural, but in that moment, I knew there was no denying their existence. The woman's smile turned into a sinister grin, and she reached out to touch me. I closed my eyes, expecting to feel her icy hand on my skin, but instead, I felt a sudden gust of wind and a loud crash of thunder. When I opened my eyes, the woman was gone, and I was standing in the middle of a clearing surrounded by ancient-looking trees. The fog had dissipated, and the moon shone down on me, casting an eerie light on the surroundings. I looked at my arms and legs, and I was a kid again. In fact, I remembered the outfit I was wearing. I felt lost and out of place. Then I remembered I was lost. This was when I had gotten lost in the trees on the hill above the farm. My parents were looking for me. This was some sort of memory I was living through again. I felt alone and terrified. The memory came rushing back, and the fear was as palpable as it was back then. I tried to make sense of it all, but before I could process anything, I heard a voice behind me. "Help me." "Remember," the voice said. I turned around and saw the ghosts. They were everywhere, floating around me in a haze of mist and fog. Some were whispering my name, while others appeared to be in pain or angry. The nightmare image of the ethereal forms dancing and cavorting through the air was too much, and I turned and fled. The terror compelled me to run, but I felt a sudden weight in my steps, and I slowed to a stop. I looked back and saw the ghostly form of the woman again. She stared at me and pointed again, further up the hill, and floated before me in silent judgment, never uttering a word. Memories flooded back, but this time they were clearer. They'd brought understanding and a sense of purpose. I finally remembered. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, all the while feeling the ghost's presence leading me on. Then I saw it, the clearing in the forest. I remembered it well, despite trying to deny the memory and suppress its very existence. My body trembled as I looked down, just as I did so many years ago. It was then that I saw her again, her body being slowly buried in a small clearing in the forest on the hill. I saw her long hair laying on the ground, saw her lifeless eyes staring at me cowering behind a nearby tree. I saw an outstretched arm and heard the slow, methodical digging of a large faceless man slowly burying her in an unmarked grave. The full weight of the memory came back to me and made me reel with the potency of it. I had seen her there. I saw her there, and never said anything. I was terrified, too afraid of getting in trouble for getting lost. Too afraid of finding something I shouldn't have, and most of all, too afraid if that man found out I told someone. I saw it all in silent terror, and I never told anyone. I blinked my eyes, and I was back to my own body. At least my body in the correct time. I knew what I had to do. I claimed a shovel from the tool shed near the farmhouse and trudged up the frozen hill in silence, the spectral aura of the spirit never leaving the periphery of my vision. I traced a path I had no idea I remembered. I found the small clearing and I took the shovel in hand and started digging. It was not long before I had found her. What was left of her after all these years? I looked up in shame at the terrible face of the spirit. She did not look angry. She just looked thoughtful. She nodded to me, and the heavy fog enveloped her, and she vanished before my eyes. The snowfall had lessened, and the fog had begun to clear up as well. I reverently covered the bones and marked the spot they rested in. I started back down the hill and thought of the man I had seen burying the body back then. I could not recall his face, but it made me think of a big story I had heard about on the news a few years ago. I vaguely remembered hearing about a man arrested in this county for the murder of several women who had gone missing. They never found all of the women, but I realized I had likely found one of his victims back when I was a child. I had a call to make to the police. I knew that someone, somewhere had gone missing, and maybe if their families could have closure, it would be enough for the spirit to find some peace. I returned to my car and the desolate road. I turned the key and the car sprang to life. I don't know how it had started working again. Suddenly, my phone was ringing. I answered it and heard my mom's worried voice on the other end. "Where are you? We have been trying to call you for hours." I told her the truth. I had been held up by the weather. I apologized and told her I could not get a tree, but I was safe and on the way back now. I looked around and saw that the fog had lifted, and the storm had passed. It was as if nothing had happened. As I drove home, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace and relief wash over me. And as I looked back at the road, I hoped that I would never be afraid of that place again. My supernatural friend brought me to hell. I came back, awaiting my doom or destiny in the attic. Through this post on my phone, I present to you what may be my last thoughts, the final entry of a guy who has seen the unseen parts of Earth. The rain smacks down on the house like knocks on the door, begging me to come out. And I will have to face her, to kill Omerta before I die. Peeking out the window is a nauseating horror show. Mr. Allen and his daughter Benny's dead body float outside in the gigantic flood waters there. On occasion, Benny and her dad flop on top of each other, creating a stomach-churning sadness, as choppy as the waters outside the door. Omerta and Benny were best friends, and yet she did this to her. Like I said before, all this hate was once love. And yet what I didn't realize was the hate was always there. It was just aimed in a different direction. The slurping, sloshing sound of a flooded basement taunts me. If Omerta chose to, she could appear through there, and like some sea serpent, drag me through the floodwater, transport me to the ocean, and places deeper than the Mariana Trench. She wants worse than that for me based on our last phone call. "Death on the surface is too good for you, traitor," she said, "where the light of the sun could give you a little joy. Awe. Did you want the privilege of getting your screams heard? Did you want to close your eyes on the setting sun and accept death? How did I not see all this hate sooner?" The hate didn't even really show up when we called her out for it after I got back from the farm. It took me a while to bring up the farm. It was too painful. Yet I must tell you about how we brought up the farm to Omerta, because that is the second most important part of this story. Of course, the end is the most important, as it always is. The night I called her out, it was all of us best friends. Benny, me, JJ, and Omerta. Attempting to relax and acting like everything was normal after my trip to the other world. Ironically, we were in the basement of the house I might die in now. Omerta and Little John lounged in beanbag chairs, tossing a ball back and forth. Benny paced in the room, filling me in on what I missed while I was gone. Benny's words never reached me as I swiveled in a desk chair, my thoughts battling with the most important question in my life. Cutting off Benny, I said. Omerta, where was I? Oh, she said, getting up and taking my hand in hers. That was the farm. It's actually on Earth, but not the worst place here. Ever been to Jersey? She laughed, and Benny chuckled. Little John grunted, and I remained silent. Tough crowd, Omerta said. But yeah, it's the last slave state. Lincoln actually did get rid of slavery in our world too. How do we free them? I asked. Look at this guy. Omerta joked and pointed a thumb at me. He's Harriet Tubman now. You know we had our own mermaid Harriet Tubman. Guess what her name was? What? Benny asked. Mermaid Harriet Tubman. Omerta laughed at herself, and she was the only one. Did you send people there to be slaves, Omerta? I pressed. Better than sending them to Ohio. She laughed and raised her hands to retrieve high fives. Am I right, Gen Z? Skibbity toilet. And all that. No one moved. Fine, Omerta admitted. Yes, I sent people there to be slaves. They all deserved it. I'm not sure if anyone ever deserves to be a slave, Benny added. They were bad people, Omerta said. Mermaid's kiss, I said, and then stuttered because my mind was racing as I put two and two together. Whenever we said a bully or teacher was giving us a hard time, you said you gave them a mermaid kiss. Is that? Did you send them to the farm? Yes, she said. Omerta. Little John barked. They were bad people. So you replaced them, put them in slave bodies, and put their old bodies on autopilot. Stop looking at me like that. They were bad people. Some of them were 12, I said. Some of them just had a bad day. Omerta, you've been with me since I was 5. Benny stuttered out, and then she gasped. Kayla McCarthy. Omerta, no, my kindergarten bully. Omerta, you didn't. Oh, come on. Kayla McCarthy. Terrible name. She would have grown up to be a. She was 5, Benny said. Malice laced Benny's voice for the first time since I'd met her. Well, she's not 5 now, if it helps. Omerta. Benny said, icy voice, shooting daggers. That's evil. That's farming. Cull the bad so the good can grow. Omerta countered cooler than any rage Benny could muster. The torturing of a child. The loss of parents before you could read a chapter book. The fear a 5-year-old must have been dumped in a wasteland. The evil damning nature of judging someone by their mistakes, a year after they're potty trained, all meant nothing to her. What do mermaids know about farming? You live underwater, I asked, desperate to make some point, something she couldn't refute. Not always, she shrugged, and that fear she put crept on me again. We weren't always under the sea. You changed, my dad. Little John said, his tone wavering in its neutrality. Yes, she said, and pointed to him. Yes, he hurt you and I fixed him. What's the problem? He's not really my dad anymore. No, not really, and isn't that a good thing? Omerta beamed a smile as white as a pearl at Little John, and he nodded slowly. People can change, I said. I've changed. I was only in there for a week, but I promise you it changes you. Omerta waved me off. What, you think people can't change? I was an animal there, Omerta. I drank piss. Was that what I always was? Omerta didn't answer. She blinked at me. I'm not. I screamed to her and myself. If I can't change, then you might as well have left me there, because that's where I belong. Hey, no. You belong with me because you're good. You're all good people. You'll always be good people, like me. You have to give them a chance, Omerta. Benny said. People can change. No, I cut in. You have to give them a chance because that's what humanity is. A bunch of people changing. Telling somebody exactly what they are and putting them into this box. That's Hitler shit. That's Stalin shit. That's how you start a genocide. And I won't be a part of it. Oh, that's great, Omerta said and hugged me. Because you were never a part of it. All you have to do is be my friend, and I'll do it. I pushed her away, and I found myself screaming in her face. "No," I said. "I'm not standing by and letting you damn a bunch of people. Hey, I'm your friend. I didn't mean to get you sent there. I promise you I tried so hard to get you out. I promise. It's not about that. I can show you magic. I can make you forget about the time at the farm. I got revenge, by the way. The guy who sent you there is dead. I would never let what he did to you slide. I promise you I'm your friend. I'm not yours, Omerta. JJ, I have asked nothing of you but friendship. I'm not using you. I was never using you. You're like my brother. I know. Omerta. JJ, please. Once we found out what Omerta really was and what she was doing, and after 2 weeks of trying to convince her to stop, we left her. But that wouldn't be enough. That wouldn't be justice. We had to stop her. She was a slaver, a monster, who wouldn't listen to reason. Omerta had to be put down. I had what could kill her, a trident of pure silver. Silver is a mermaid's deepest desire, and the only thing that could kill them. I won it gambling with her. Ironically, she let me keep it because she knew I could never hurt her. She was half right. I couldn't kill her. I couldn't go that far. Little John volunteered, though. I knew he could. He always believed he was destined for something special. And was this not special? We met on top of the parking garage to his apartment building in the middle of the night. It hung over the city so you could see the skyline. Little John was already there, out of his car. He stared out at the parking garage looking over the city. I parked beside him and grabbed the suitcase holding the trident out of my car. Awkward about the method, but positive it had to be done. I wobbled with it toward Little John. "What's up?" he said, still not bothering to look at me, which did seem to be a bit unnerving. "Hey," I said back. "I've got it if you want to take it." He ignored me. I took my place beside him, and this made him smile. "You ever seen Scarface?" he asked. "No, not my type of movie." "I loved it. Look at that city. The world is yours. The world is yours." He began to sing the chorus of the Nas song with the same name. He was a terrible singer, yet the city was beautiful. The flashing lights of the building looked like stars. "So is Scarface good?" I asked. "Should I watch it or something?" "Yeah, it's good, but don't watch it. You should live it." "How am I going to live it if I don't watch it?" "Want a drink?" He asked me and brought out a beer. I hated beer, too bitter, especially after drinking all the mystical stuff. But I saw how he pleaded with me in his eyes, so I accepted. "Scarface is about this immigrant kid, right? An immigrant like me, except he's here legally. Don't tell the feds," he said, putting his finger on his lip to signify it was a secret, and then he would bob and weave his head like he was trying to avoid the gaze of the cops. He always did this whenever he talked about his immigration status. It always made me laugh. And so Scarface makes an empire for himself, then he dies. And people always vilify him because he was a criminal, and it was wrong to do what he did, but I get it. That's what happens when people make you feel small, you know. People will go through all sorts of lengths if they feel small, like they're going to do the thing that makes them feel big. You get what I'm saying? Do you feel small? I cut myself off. How could someone who was given the name Little John not feel small? Poor guy. But I didn't understand what he was getting at, yet. I didn't finish my beer. The tension in the atmosphere wiggled and tightened like a string. "No. Explain it to me," I said. "Ah, don't worry about it. I'm glad we got to have a drink together, man." "Too many more," I said and raised my beer. He burped, and before he could toast, he spilled his drink. "Oops," he said. And we laughed, and the spill of the drink took the tension. We looked at our city and laughed about our adventures, and talked about all the women and fairies we thought were the hottest and how, if we ever made it back to that mystical world, whom we would ask out. It was all so funny. So us, until he paused. "Hey, JJ, what if we are better?" "What?" What if we are better than who Omerta sent down to the farm? In fact, I know I was better than my dad. He sucked. He came up with the name Little John, because I was so fat as a kid. He came up with a lot of names for all my siblings, and with a deeper voice, much quieter. He hit like a demon. I mean, that doesn't mean he deserves to go to hell. Says who? Elf. I believe I'm good enough for something. No, man. It sounds like because you believe no one else can be. Well, maybe they can't. Do you know how far I've come? I came to this country with nothing, and now I'm my own man. Yeah, man. You've done a lot. And I deserve to be treated like it. I deserve what I have, and I won't give it up. All right. How about no more drinks, va? You're right, just water, he said, and brought the fresh, cold bottle of water from his cooler. When he said water, time slowed down for me. Water, the one element Omerta could transport from. I understand everything perfectly. Little John wasn't going to use that trident to kill Omerta. Our conversation that night made sense. What he said before. People will go through all sorts of lengths if they feel small, like they're going to do the thing that makes them feel big. I deserve what I have, and I won't give it up. And without Omerta, if we had to live in the real world, we were so small. He chose life with Omerta over justice, mercy, and me. I ran before he could release her from the water bottle, before she could break my neck as she did to Benny's dad. I hopped in my car and drove off. Grateful to be alive, but mourning my mistake, I left the trident. Reader, there is another twist to the tale that answers the most pressing question I asked in my first post. Can humans change? I asked you this at the beginning of my tale, and thanks to a recent development, I have an answer for you. About 2 hours ago, before the house was completely flooded, the hum of an engine outside brought me back to the present day. A silver Cybertruck pulled into the driveway. I knew exactly who it was. Little John. What could he want with me? My husky friend hopped out of his car, with the case containing the trident. Impossible. I leaped the stairs in my rush down them. In a couple of hopeful bounds, the door was before me. With a twist of the knob and a wide swing, I welcomed my prodigal brother. He had betrayed me, but he had come home. Omerta saw him come home as well, and that she would not stand for. By her will, the rain turned to hail. Hail shattering into the ground the size of coins, then golf balls, then coal like she was Santa Claus, and she had gifts for her naughty children. The hail created a cracking, demented sound that crushed the world outside of the house. Many lives were on the line, but I begged Little John to place the trident over his head for protection. Who cares if it got damaged? Little John was my friend, my brother. I wanted him to live. Hard-headed, but not as hard as hail. He ignored me. Hail dented Little John's head as he stepped, slow and agonizingly, forward. Red chasms peppered his head. The hail rolled in the holes in his skull like golf balls trying to fall into their homes in the green. The assault was as vomit-inducing and unnatural as a Dalmatian spot being cut from it in inaccurate circles. Little John hugged the trident as that precious mind, the one he thought would allow him to change the world, the one Omerta valued so much, cracked. Plop, plop, plop. By the time he made it to the door, he was a trypophobic nightmare, unrecognizable to even his mother. Too many balls of hail dropped his face. And Little John was a hero. I brought his body and the case in, careful to stay under the roof. Now, reader, I bring you to right now perhaps my final moments. The Cybertruck has washed away. The house I'm in will fall to the flood soon. Trident in hand, now I journey to the top of the roof. By Omerta's will the hail stopped. The wicked woman wants me to go into the water. She floats in front of me, half of her head above the surface, so it appears her eyes rest on the water like an alligator's. I will leap through the attic window and dive in to battle her. I did not know my purpose or what I wanted like Benny and Little John, but I knew what I hated. I hated the bullies in school who treated me like I would always be worthless, and the teachers who didn't do anything, because they believed I could never be anything. I hated Omerta, who damned everyone who did wrong in her eyes, because she believed man could not change. And that taught me I loved humanity. To be human is to err and change. Therefore, it is good to fight against anything that denies us of that. Today, I fight for little John, the abused child, to a self-righteous hero, to a selfless champion. Today, I fight for Benny, the shy outcast turned evangelist turned chainsaw-wielding savior. And I fight against Omerta, whose greatest sin is that she believed she was without sin and demanded to throw stones at flowers that didn't get even a chance to bloom. I will not write back, whether I win or not, because it doesn't matter. All that matters is that the sensitive kid who could never stand up for himself, who was made into something lower than even an animal, got back up and changed again to stand for something. I will fight a monster because that is the most sacred part of humanity, the ability to change. My husband had an accident. Nothing has been the same since. I woke to the sound of knocking at the door of the apartment I shared with my partner. It was a little late for visitors or neighbors to be coming by to borrow something, I mused. I slipped out of bed and exited the room. 1 minute. I called out, my voice still thick with sleep. I made my way to the front door, where I was greeted by 2 grim-faced uniformed police officers. Mr. Watkins, the one to my right-hand side, asked. Yes. May I help you? I asked. Are you married to a... He paused to check the notes on a small pad of paper. Terrence Watkins. He prodded further. I am. What is this about? I countered, already slightly defensive and on edge due to the circumstances. I wondered if my usually mild-mannered husband had gotten in trouble. We're sorry to inform you that your husband has been in an accident. The officer, who had been silent, stepped into the conversation. I felt as if someone had hit me in the chest with a sledgehammer. I couldn't breathe or make a sound, but silent tears streamed from my eyes. The first officer who had spoke up caught me when my knees buckled, and they entered the house, helping me to a seat in the small living room. I managed to calm down enough to talk again. Is he alive? The question was shaky, but clear. He is alive. You don't seem to be in the condition to drive, so we can give you a ride to the hospital if you like, the quieter police officer said. I nodded my head and then hurried back into the bedroom, where I quickly changed my clothes and put on socks and shoes. They escorted me to the cruiser and let me into the back seat. For a moment, I felt as if I were in trouble, that being the first time I had ever been in the back of a police car. When we arrived at the large building, they let me out, following me inside. One of the officers went and talked to the receptionist for me. The men in uniform stayed behind when I walked toward the elevator. The ride up to the intensive care unit seemed to take an hour. When the doors finally rolled open, I stepped out, finding my way to the appropriate room. And when I stepped through the open doorway, I froze. My husband was lying on his back with so many wires, hoses, and tubes snaking away from his body in various directions that I failed to process what I was seeing for a moment. I moved to his bedside and reached out, taking the hand of my partner. I don't know if you can hear me, but I am here, baby, I said. There was no response, not even a squeeze of my fingers. I had hoped that his situation wasn't as bad as it looked. My heart sank when the nurse and doctor entered the room and confirmed all of my worst fears. Terry was in a coma, completely brain dead. How long can we keep him on life support? I remember asking. A few months. There's always hope that he will wake up. The best thing to can do is to be here and talk to him when you can. Tonight, you need to go home and get some rest, the doctor informed me. The nurse even called me a cab, and I tried to sleep, but kept waking every few hours, convinced I had heard my phone ring. There were no notifications when I checked, however. I called my boss the next morning and informed him I wouldn't be in for at least a couple of days. Thankfully, he was sympathetic to my situation and told me to take as much time as I needed. I took a shower and shaved, making myself at least look like I had my shit together before I went to the hospital, and sat with my husband. Both of our parents visited, and there was prayer and tears among them. I remember sitting in the chapel with them, but I couldn't bring myself to join the prayers. Days passed in similar fashion. When I was not at work, I was in that room with the man I loved. I was starting to lose hope after almost a month, and finally entered the chapel alone. And I sat in front of the altar, sobbing, finally breaking down in prayer. A few days came and went after that, and then one morning I stepped into the room to find Terry's eyes open. I freaked out, screaming for the doctor. The staff rushed in to see what had stirred me up, and I was quickly ushered out of the room. The doctor joined me in the hallway. "Your husband is alert and responsive, but I have to caution you that he was unconscious for a long time, and we have seen cases where things like this can lead to wild personality shifts," he said, using a gentle, professional tone. I nodded, but wasn't really absorbing what the man had said. I was just happy that the other man was awake. Some of my joy was dampened by the fact that he was having trouble remembering words and names of common objects. I was grateful, however, that he seemed to remember me, holding my hand and squeezing it affectionately when it was offered. The initial few weeks after his awakening went by slowly while he learned to walk and eat again. The trouble started in the days after he came home. Terry couldn't sleep. I had similar problems in the hospital, but eventually they would give me something to help me. He confessed during a long conversation that led to a protracted argument, and I went to bed angry. We didn't really speak for a few days, and one day, about 2 days after the fight, I came home to an empty apartment. I tried not to worry about it, though I looked for a note and didn't find one. I wasn't surprised then, when Terry came home in the middle of the night. I was, however, startled to hear another voice, this one female. "Are you sure that he won't wake up?" the strange woman asked just as I had cracked the door. "He sleeps harder than most humans. We will not be discovered," Terry replied. I considered bursting that bubble, but something told me to wait. I did open the door slightly wider, but the woman began to turn in my direction, and I stopped doing everything, including breathing. After a half a minute, I stepped backward. "We should go somewhere else." "I know somewhere," the woman said, loud enough for me to hear through the partially cracked door. They did leave shortly after that, and I considered following them, but thought better of it. I cried myself back to sleep instead. I wondered if this was what the doctor had tried to warn me about the next morning, as I shared a silent meal with the man I had married. I desperately tried to think of something to say, but couldn't. He made no effort to start a conversation either. I swallowed the urge to ask about his visitor the night before, and instead got ready to go to work. When I got home, the apartment was vacant again. My husband had left his clothing and other items, so I assumed he would be home late once again. I did wake when the door opened and closed, but didn't get up this time. Days like this turned to weeks. Eventually, my curiosity got the better of me. I turned on the location sharing on my lover's phone, and I even left work early in order to get extra sleep. I heard Terrence enter the apartment with the strange woman again. They stayed only a short time, and this time when they left, I slipped from my bed and out the door behind them. I used my phone to track them, driving slowly until they stopped in the middle of nowhere. I sped up when I got past the traffic lights and stop signs, only slowing when the GPS prompted me to turn off of the pavement onto a narrow dirt lane. I stopped at the side of this small road as I got near my husband's location and proceeded on foot, afraid of alerting him and his companion to my presence. I had suspected he was cheating on me, but when I rounded the corner, that no longer made sense. The only structure in the area was a large old barn. I glanced around and saw Terry's car parked to a small minivan. I glanced around, but it didn't seem anyone was outside. I hurried toward the building, and as I did, noticed strange, flickering lights through the gaps under the doors. I could also hear people chanting inside. I crept to a small door to the left-hand side of the building. The barrier partially cracked, allowing me to peer inside. I didn't see Terry, but I could see the back of his new friend's head. It was bowed as if in prayer. I reached out and gently pried the door open a little further, poking my head inside to see a group of people standing in a circle, a candle at each of their feet. Terry was in the middle, his torso bare, skin smeared, and marked with dark ash. He seemed to be leading the chants. I don't know if the cry I felt escaped or I simply gasped, but the woman, who was directly in front of me, spun in a rapid about-face maneuver. I bolted, sprinting back to my car. I went straight home, expecting them to follow behind me. They didn't. I didn't see the man I had married for 2 whole days. When he did return, neither of us mentioned the incident a few nights before. Honestly, I didn't even know if they investigated or knew that I had seen them. I didn't really want to find out. A week later, he moved out, but still hasn't asked for a divorce. That's where we still stand at the moment. Separated. I haven't seen Terry in 2 months. I will update if anything changes. I made a post about a while ago about my husband. I have been trying to mind my own business. I had never violated Terry's privacy before that night, or since. I still don't know what to think about what I saw in that barn. We have talked for the first time in months. Maybe being away from me on Thanksgiving finally gave him a wake-up call, because he called me. When we met, he didn't mention the night I had followed him. So I started to suspect he didn't know it had happened. I wasn't going to be the one to bring it up. I was just happy to have him home, even if it only lasted an hour, and we barely talked. When he left, I checked to see if he had disabled location sharing on his phone. He hadn't. I considered snooping, but managed to restrain myself. I tried to focus on Christmas shopping online, but the urge to pry into my husband's recent activities overwhelmed me. He had been visiting that strange barn at the edge of town a lot lately. I had flashbacks of that night. The strangers surrounding my lover, with those candles at their feet, speaking those strange words. I tried to push it out of my mind. Eventually, I managed to focus on my work and try to return to normal. I was well on my way to that, even though I have started drinking at night to help me sleep, and if I'm honest, cope with the loneliness I have felt over the last few months. I want my husband back, but I don't know how to go about achieving that goal. I called him the other day, but the conversation was brief. One positive is that we were cordial. He's actually starting to act more like himself again. Maybe all of this is his way of processing his time in the coma. I planned to ask him about that the next time we met up, and I finally worked up the nerve to call him for the second time in a week. I arranged for us to meet on Sunday. The next couple of days seemed to crawl and grow progressively more lonely as I eagerly anticipated my opportunity to get some answers. Sunday arrived, and I was chipper as I made a pot of coffee and even a small breakfast for myself. I didn't realize how hungry I was, devouring the waffles quickly. I ventured into the bathroom and quickly noticed that I had also been neglecting my appearance. I shaved and hurried out of the apartment, driving myself downtown to get a haircut as well. I went and visited my mother, who has been supporting me, though I didn't tell her about the strange ritual in the barn. We talked for a long time, and she echoed a sentiment that I recalled from a comment on my original post. It was time to get my husband back, though I didn't know exactly how to go about it. I went home and got ready to meet Terry, changing my clothes. I called my husband to confirm that he still wanted to see me, and he said he did, and even suggested a restaurant that we frequented in the early days of our relationship. That gave me hope, and I was actually smiling when I got into the car, already planning on things to say. My spirits died when I saw Terry waiting for me at the doors to the building with an official-looking envelope. "Don't open this until we get inside, please," he said, and I felt my face fall into a frown. "What's going on, Terrence?" I asked, but he didn't answer. He simply turned and walked inside the building, and I followed. We were seated quickly, which I found odd, and the server seemed to linger at our table, even though we had already ordered our drinks. Eventually, the young man walked away, and my husband looked at me with a semi-glazed look in his eyes. I opened the envelope. When I saw the header of the papers, my heart stopped. Divorce. The word felt heavy and my lips and tongue felt numb as I spoke it. Yes, he replied with no emotion, though the question had been rhetorical. I shook my head and tucked the papers away before the young man brought my soda and his water. Anger and sadness were at war inside me. I wanted to confront him about how much he had changed since the car accident. Instead, I broke down in tears. I stood and excused myself. I didn't feel stable enough to drive home, so I called my mother, who was more than happy to come and pick me up. "It went that badly, huh?" she asked me, trying to be sympathetic. "He wants a divorce," I explained. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry," she said, reaching over to pat the back of my hand before returning her grip to the wheel. I didn't reply, simply stared out of the window until we arrived at my home. When I got inside, I placed the paperwork on the dining room table, sitting down to start reading through the packet. His reason for the divorce was irreconcilable differences, but had offered no explanation in the space provided. For a moment I wondered if he had somehow changed his sexuality after awakening from the coma. I gave myself a few days to process things and called him last Wednesday. Once again, he was cordial with me, almost as if he weren't breaking my heart. It was that night that I decided I would do something drastic. If he went out to that barn, I would go there as well and confront him. I checked his location obsessively that night, but he stayed in town. It was Friday before he visited the barn, but true to my silent promise, I got dressed in all black clothing and drove out of town. I parked on the side of the narrow dirt road again, glancing around as I pulled the hood over my head, the chill immediately biting my ears. My breath hung in the air as I crept forward. I looked around, but again saw nobody outside the building. I could again see the flickering light. I hurried toward the barn, feeling emboldened suddenly. I was going to get my answers at the very least. I didn't care what any of the strangers said. Those thoughts died in my brain when I tried to open the door I had peeked through before. It was shut, and there was no give to it at all. That meant that someone had known about my visit after all. I could hear Terry's voice through the wall, once again leading that foreign chant. I looked around again, feeling as if I were being watched. I saw no one as I looked over by the minivan and other car parked in the small lot again, but the feeling persisted. I stepped away from the door and started around toward the front of the building. I heard a scrabbling sound from the roof of the barn, which caused my head to jerk in that direction. The first thing I noticed were a pair of glowing deep purple eyes in the darkness above my head. I couldn't make out the form of the thing initially, as it kind of blended into the gloom around it. It moved, and I took it in. The thing was bipedal, but I would not call it humanoid. It was like a twisted, undulating mass of darkness except for the eyes. A cry rose from my throat before I could slam my mouth closed, and the thing on the roof reacted, leaping toward me. I started running before it landed on the ground, and didn't look back until I reached my car. It hadn't chased me. I sat behind the wheel and waited to see the thing coming at me. I didn't. I also didn't leave as I was planning to do as I sprinted down the dirt road. Instead, I turned, so galvanized me. I accelerated until I got closer to the barn, the palm of my hand pressing into the horn, laying on it. The prolonged beeping sound seemed to drown out everything, and when I braked, I shifted the car into park, and my foot pressed the accelerator to the floor. The impromptu plan to disrupt whatever they were doing worked. The barn doors opened, and there was a group of angry people illuminated by the lights on the car. One of them, the woman who had been at my apartment, began to grin. She stepped forward and raised her left arm, 2 fingers of that hand directed at my car. There was a thud on the roof, and I heard a low rumbling noise above me. The sound seemed to resonate in my very core, turning my guts and spine into jelly in an instant. I slammed the car into reverse and pressed the gas again. The wheels spun for a half a second before it started moving backward. The thing on the roof hung on somehow, and I started to panic. I slammed on the brakes as hard as I could. That threw the thing in front of my car, and I got a good look at it for the first time. Its flesh was as dark as I had thought, and pulsing with odd cyst-like knobs that seemed to have minds of their own. The worst part was that twisted face, No nose or ears, just a knobby mass with a split that revealed rotted-looking, sharp teeth. I screamed again and started to reverse again. I turned my car around as the creature rushed toward me. I glanced in the rearview mirror as I rounded the corner and punched the gas pedal again, the thing with the glowing eyes gaining ground on me even as I sped up. It stopped when I reached the main road, and I breathed a sigh of relief, even though I was still terrified. I drove the rest of the way home and tried to reason through the night's events. I have spent the past 5 days or so going down internet rabbit holes, trying to figure out what the thing I saw was, but have had no luck. Another recurring question I have is this: what happened to my husband while he was comatose, and who are these strangers he is meeting with? I don't know about going back to the barn, with that beast guarding them. I signed the divorce papers, and am going to call my soon-to-be ex-husband. Maybe I will confront him on the phone. I will update again soon. I have some bad luck coming. I'm not going to give you my real name or location, as this is still somewhat ongoing, and I need to remain anonymous. But do need some advice on escaping my predicament. What led to my life being ruined started as a stupid gift. My girlfriend, I'll refer to her as Audrey, texted me. She wanted to see me. She said she had something that would cheer me up. You see, earlier at school, I told her about the big fight my dad had started with me. He was always nagging at me about responsibilities and manliness. He didn't get it. I was going to be a YouTuber when I graduated. He knew this, yet he kept pushing. I had no interest in working my life away for pennies like he had. But what really hurt is my mom took his side. She always had my back. But she betrayed me. She told me my dad was right, that I should have something to fall back on. It was like she expected me to fail. Audrey knew I was upset, and being the sweetheart she wanted to help cheer me up. Just talking to her improved my mood. She was my rock. We met at our usual place, the abandoned boathouse a mile from where I lived. The place was creepy and dirty but private. I would often go there during school, skipping a few classes to write in my journal or scroll Reddit. I got there and saw Audrey waiting for me. As usual, she was dressed in all black. Some girls had a goth phase in high school, but Audrey lived it full time. She didn't care what people thought about her, and I loved her for that. "All right, babe, you have to close your eyes." I thought about arguing but didn't. She was too excited. I closed my eyes. "Hold out your hand." I did as she asked, and felt something hairy and warm brush my fingers. My eyes snapped open. I almost dropped the object. It was revolting. Audrey had placed a stuffed monkey in my hand, and not like a toy, but a grotesque, malformed little taxidermied animal. "What the hell, Audrey? What is that?" She laughed and closed my fingers around it. She got right up in my face. I was painfully aware of the gross little thing crushed between us. She whispered in my ear, "It's a lucky charm. Take it home and place a bowl of milk and some bread by it." At least that's what the old Romanian woman I bought it from said. I gave her a disapproving look. "You really shouldn't be talking to people like that. They're untrustworthy." Audrey scoffed, ignoring my advice. We playfully argued for a bit, then sat watching the water until the sun started to get low. We said our goodbyes and went our separate ways. When I got home, my dad was waiting. "Where have you been? We tried calling you." I didn't feel like talking, so I kept walking. He yelled after me, "Hey, I asked you a question, Josh. You've been missing for hours." I just didn't have the energy to deal with his bullshit. I slammed my bedroom door shut and jumped into my bed. Audrey texted me, "Don't forget to feed Junior." If she really wanted to cheer me up, titty pics would have been a better solution. But despite my constant encouragement, she was too self-conscious for things like that. Knowing she would ask about it in the morning, I crept downstairs and grabbed some bread and a jug of milk. I poured some in an empty Nintendo can and placed the bread next to it. Good enough, I thought to myself before going to bed. I woke up to my dad pounding on my bedroom door. I groaned. It was 8 o'clock on a Saturday. What could he possibly want? "What, Dad?" I snapped. Did you drink all the milk? Looked at the gallon jug sitting on my dresser. No, I didn't drink any milk. I could hear him talking to himself, clearly confused as to where it went. I heard him walk back downstairs. I didn't get out of bed until I heard his car leave. He would be at work until dinner time, meaning I had the day to myself. I checked my YouTube channel, nearly 200 subscribers. It was growing, but I needed it to grow faster. Why won't this channel explode already? I wish it would just start growing. I didn't get it. It was a reaction channel. People loved reaction channels. I had funny jokes and insightful ideas. I must be shadow banned. I texted Audrey asking her if she wanted to come over while my parents were at work. She replied, "Sure. How was your first night with Junior?" Oh crap. I had forgotten about that little monkey thing. I ran back upstairs. It was missing. Audrey would be pissed if I lost it. I frantically searched the room, but it was no use. I wished that thing would show itself. I sat on the bed dreading Audrey's arrival. "Do you really wish to see me?" I jumped at the sound. It was like a whisper on the wind. "Who's there? Show yourself." The whisper returned. "As you wish." I heard a dragging noise from under my bed. I quickly pulled my legs up. The noise grew louder. That disgusting little thing crawled out from under my bed. It turned its head around backwards and looked up at me. I screamed. It was terrifying. "Are you not pleased with your wish?" I pulled out my phone. I texted Audrey. "Did you lace that thing with drugs?" She texted back right away. "No, of course not." Why? I could no longer deny it. This was my path forward. Such divine intervention could only mean that I was meant to go on my own and start my career. Should I tell Audrey? It wasn't even a question. She had always had my back. I called her and told her to meet me at the boathouse. It took her longer than it should have to show up, but when she finally arrived, I could barely contain myself. "I'm doing it, Audrey. I'm moving out and starting my YouTube career." Her smile kind of faltered. It was only for a second, but it was enough that I noticed. "What? Aren't you happy for me?" She rushed up to me. "Of course I'm happy, Josh. I just don't want things to not work out. That's a huge step." I couldn't believe it. After all this time, she didn't really believe in me. I threw the paper bag at her. "Look in there. It's my first YouTube payment. I'll be getting that monthly. Still doubt me?" It was a lie, but there was no way she could have known that. I just needed her to know I had what it takes. Her eyes widened at the sight of the cash. "Josh, that's incredible. I didn't know the channel had grown so much." She looked at me. "And I wasn't doubting you. I just don't want to see you hurt." I pulled her in close. "I can get you anything you want. Anything in the world. Would you like that?" I could still see the doubt in her eyes, the way she was stiff against me. She didn't believe me. I would show her. "Sure, Josh. What do your parents think about this?" I let go of her. Of all the things to bring up right now, she had to talk about them. "I don't care what they think. I'm practically an adult and can clearly take care of myself." Audrey didn't look convinced. She didn't even look happy. She was ruining my moment. "It's whatever, Audrey. Just go back to school if you don't care." She pushed me away. "Fine. Be that way. I'm just trying to be reasonable." The instant she left, regret filled me. I called out after her. I even looked outside, but she was gone. I had to make it right. I could give her anything. So I called out, "Hey, monkey bitch. Your master is calling." A cold breeze caressed my face. I knew I wasn't alone. I need to make things better with Audrey. My voice died. What exactly did she like other than me? Wishing she had me would be pointless, but it didn't have to be a physical gift. She had always been self-conscious about certain things. I could take that away for her, or I could fix it. She would no longer feel inadequate, and I would have an even hotter girlfriend. Monkey, don't mess this up. Listen very closely. I want you to give Audrey the body of a model and a love for crop top shirts. I felt like I deserved that second part. After all, Audrey was going to get something that would normally take months of dedicated work, if not surgery. You can handle that, right? That sickly voice whispered in my ear. as well as I did your earlier wish. A fantastic idea entered my head. I would go back to school. Just for a day. I had a few things to wish into reality. I decided I would need a full day for what I had planned. Finding a place to sleep sucked at first. Motels wouldn't rent me a room without an ID or credit card. I wouldn't go home, so I had no choice but to wish for an invitation to the biggest house around. The mayor and her stupid perfect twins, Jack and Jill. Yeah, she was that kind of parent. Jack was the football captain and Jill was a cheerleader. It was gross how easy success came to them. I hated them. All the more reason to mess with them. Monkey bitch. I wished Jack de los Santos would invite me to stay at his house. I shivered as a cold breath ran down my neck. But my phone went off. It was a text from an unknown number. Hey, this is Jack from school. I know this is a little sudden, but would you like to crash on my couch? I literally could not stop laughing. That dumb jock had no idea what was coming. Next, I made him come and pick me up. After an admittedly awkward dinner, I felt like it was bedtime. On my way to the guest room, Jill stopped me. She stood in the middle of the hallway with her arms crossed. I hated how perfect her hair looked. I hated how hot she was. I couldn't stand how she got everything she had ever wanted. Spill the beans, Josh. How did you get invited here? Do you have some dirt on Jack? I couldn't help but smirk. She had no idea who she was dealing with. Oh, it's nothing like that. He's just a big fan of my YouTube channel. And as a fan, he wanted to hang out. Jill made an exaggerated puking motion. Police dude. Jack hardly even watches YouTube. We have this thing called a life. At least now, I knew who would be the first to be humbled tomorrow at school. I attempted to brush past her. After all, it was clear I was beyond this conversation. But as I did, she put a shoulder into my chest, painfully halting me. Whatever it is you think you're doing, stop it right now. I couldn't tell if she was threatening me or trying to seduce me. Either way, she had gone too far. I stepped around her and went into the guest room. After closing the door, I flopped onto the bed. I lay there thinking about all the different ways I would make her regret her attitude. For probably the first time in my life, I woke up on time and was excited to go to school. I texted Audrey, "Can't wait to see you in class." She sent something back, but I had other things to deal with. People's mouths hung open when I jumped out of Jack's Mustang. I tipped him $100 just to let everyone know who the big boss was. I strode through the crowd with the confidence I know they felt. This was going to be a great day. I started with Miss Marinoni. She really did try her best and was easily the prettiest teacher I had ever seen. For her, I wished her student loans would be lost and that she would get a raise. Of course, Stanley was ogling her. I mean, we all liked to look, but that fat bitch was just staring at her. Well, he would have to learn. I wished he would say the thoughts in his head. Stanley jumped to his feet and yelled, "Miss Marinoni, I would please you all night if I had the chance." Miss Marinoni turned away from the whiteboard, and with one hand on her hip, she pointed to the door with the other. "Principal's office right now." That is not acceptable. I was the only one laughing, which was a little awkward, but whatever. I was surprised Audrey wasn't in class. She would have been right there alongside me. Then I remembered her text. I pulled out my phone. "Sorry, Josh. I'm not going to make it in today. I don't feel right." Of course she would be sick on a day like today. I almost texted her back that the girl flu isn't a real disease, but choose not to. When lunchtime rolled around, I took full advantage. Aries puked for all those times he called me names. Raphael slipped and was covered in food for that time. He tripped me in middle school. The cheer table, Aka Bitch Central, had every member simultaneously blow milk out of their noses. By the end of lunch, my sides hurt from all the laughing. When we were released, Jill was waiting for me in the hallway. She stepped into a dark classroom. "Come here a minute, handsome." While I hadn't wished for this, it was a welcome outcome to my obvious charm. I had a brief thought about Audrey as I entered the dark room, but rationalize it wouldn't matter. Jill's seductive voice called to me from deeper in the room. I couldn't see a thing. "A little farther, Joshua." I was so ready, and then multiple sets of hands grabbed me. covered my mouth and began to beat me. I tried to call out. I tried to wish it away, but they had a firm grasp over my mouth. The beating went on forever. My ribs and abs were bruised and possibly broken. And then they all left the room. Like it had been a totally normal thing. Jill spat on my face as she walked past. I lay there crying. They had ruined my day. Violence was totally uncalled for, but if that's what they wanted, I could oblige. The first to suffer would be Jill. She was someone that I always hated. She acted so above others, so properly dressed and spoken. I couldn't stand her, and now she had tricked me into an assassination attempt. There was a reason why I was the most successful kid at school. I had what it took to make it. All she had was looks, and that's what I would take in retribution for her acts against me. Monkey. I wish for Jill de los Santos to fall and break her nose and knock out her teeth while we're at it. That sickly breath caressed me for a second. Then I heard a clattering down the hall, followed by a wail of pain. I couldn't hold in the smile. Jill had gotten what she deserved. The school nurse rushed past me, no doubt to try and assist Jill in her time of need. I turned and nearly ran right into Principal Powers. "Josh, could I speak with you for a moment?" Panic flooded through me. I was standing right here. I had nothing to do with it. Powers raised an eyebrow. Nothing to do with what? Jill tripping. I turned and ran. He was on to me. I ignored his yells about a phone call from home. No matter what he had to say, I didn't want to hear it. I left the school building. Things had gone horribly. I needed to get away. Police cars flew past me. I tried to hide my face. I felt like the whole town was looking at me. At the first chance I ran to the boathouse. Audrey was there. She spun around when she heard me. Josh. She didn't look happy to see me. She looked terrified. "Hey, you said you were sick. What gives?" Audrey had been crying. "Josh, please, just go." It was then I noticed the bundle behind her. I walked closer and Audrey jumped in front of me. "Josh, I'm begging. Please just go. I'll never say no to anything again. I'll do anything you ask, and you won't have to worry about anything, just please leave." There was blonde hair spilling out of a rolled-up rug. I turned to Audrey. "What did you do?" She broke down crying. Of all the things to do, she chose the least helpful. "I woke up this morning, and she was laying on my bedroom floor. She's a model I follow on Instagram, and somehow I have her body. So I panicked. I rolled her up and was going to dump her body in the ocean when you showed up. I was both horrified and impressed. Then I was furious. That dumb monkey had literally given Audrey the body of model. "Don't worry about it, Audrey. Go home. I'll have this taken care of so you'll never have to worry about it." She looked up at me confused, so I repeated, "Go home, Audrey." Showing some decent common sense for the first time, she did as I said. Once alone I spoke again. "You dumb little shit. That is not what I wished for. Now listen carefully. I want this body." I pointed to the body in front of me. "And the rug it is wrapped in to travel in such a way that there is no trail to the moon." I barely had the words out when with a whoosh of air the body and rug flew through the roof of the boathouse. The vacuum of their departure pulled me forward, and I ended up splashing into the frigid water. I gasped as icy salt water filled my mouth. Inadvertently, I filled my lungs with the same water. I managed to splash my way over to the ladder and started to climb up. My mind was racing with all the things I would say to that useless sack of fur. Right then, the ladder broke, and I plunged back into the water. This time I kept my mouth shut. I swam under the boathouse to the shore. My phone was ruined, my clothes were wet, and I was freezing. The De Los Santos house wasn't far. I made my way there despite the universe working against me. I walked right into this stupid boomer house. No one was home, so I grabbed some food from the kitchen, and after a shower went to the spare bedroom. I woke up in the morning to Jack standing in my doorway. "I don't know why I invited you here, but the least you could do is hang up your towel when you're done." He threw my damp towel from the night before on my bed before leaving. I wondered why he wasn't at school on a Friday morning. Getting dressed out of my newly wish-filled closet, I made my way downstairs. Jill and her mom were sitting at the breakfast table. Jill was being fed through a tube. Apparently her jaw was wired shut. She had gone through a facial surgery the night before to stabilize her orbital bones and would need a few more over the next couple weeks. I think I did a pretty good job of hiding my happiness. At least the monkey had pulled through on this wish. Her mom had to go dick around ruining things like all boomer politicians do, so Jack was staying home to give Jill her pain meds. I thought about wishing for the pain meds to be useless, but chose to be merciful. It was around midday. I had just uploaded a new reaction video to my channel, a no doubt sure to be viral video, truly some of my best work. I went downstairs to grab a zesty drink to recharge after work. Jill was sitting on the couch all stiff like a weirdo. She must have heard me because although she couldn't turn her head or her eyes, she gestured for me to come closer. Warily I did so. She held out a folded up paper. Written with embarrassingly bad penmanship was the sentence, "Sorry about yesterday." Words don't undo bad actions, I told her before returning upstairs. While admitting fault showed some character growth, she still had a long ways to go. I was on my phone scrolling through YouTube looking for the next video to react to when a text notification blocked the top of my screen. I groaned in frustration. Audrey wanted to call me. I was busy at the moment, but knew I needed to make time for her. She answered on the first ring. "Josh, we need to talk." "Yeah, babe, that's what we're doing." I could almost see her grinding her teeth. "Josh, this is really serious. Have you been home at all today?" I didn't like where this was going. "No, I told you I moved out. I'm at a mansion now." "Josh, forget all that. 3 white Tahoes showed up at school today. The guys driving them looked really mean. I heard they came from your house. And then they came to mine. They had all kinds of questions about you. I told them we had broken up a few weeks ago. And I think they bought it. Be honest with me, Josh. Where did that money come from?" The sweetness of her lying for me was squashed by her not trusting me. "Babe, go look at my YouTube account. It's clearly from there. Josh, your channel is gone." In a panic, I hung up and opened YouTube again. My account was suspended. I logged out and tried to look up my channel. It was gone. All that hard work gone just like that. I had put my heart into growing the channel, and now it was gone because of bot subscribers. That worthless monkey hadn't shown my channel to people. He had fake accounts subscribed to it. This was the second time he had messed up. This time was the worst yet. I would have to call Audrey back at some point, but first I needed to check something. The paper bag was still under the bed and still filled with cash. At least he had gotten one thing right. Bag was still under the bed and still filled with cash. At least he had gotten one thing right. I was tempted to wish myself away to another country. Surely anywhere would be better than the 53rd world countries in a trench coat I currently lived in. But I didn't really trust the monkey's wish-granting abilities after the last 2 mistakes. He would have to earn my trust again. Mrs. De Los Santos made us all stroganoff for dinner. Jill had hers juiced and pumped into her. It totally killed the vibe, especially when Jack would lean over and wipe the excess from her chin. She's 16, she can wipe her own mess. Clearly they disagreed and shot me dirty looks when I suggested as much. Whatever, weird family. Unfortunately, by speaking, I apparently gave Mrs. De Los Santos permission to talk to me. "Josh, I know you are a guest here, but I've had the school reach out. They want to make sure you are aware of the situation at home." I just nodded my head without looking up from my food. I knew what they meant. My parents were no doubt pushing to get me back into school, but I had transcended above that part of my life. She pushed a little more, and you're handling it. Because the school has very good therapists. I helped vet them myself. What kind of weak ass needs therapy to move out? Jack spoke. "Mom, what exactly happened?" She shook her head. "That's not for me to talk about." Jack nodded like a good little bitch and dinner continued on. Say what you will, growing up with all that boomer privilege had turned into Mrs. De Los Santos into quite the cook. It was going to be a shame when I took over ownership of their house. Maybe I would keep her on as a maid. I'll even give Jill a chance at begging me to let her stay. Not wanting to waste the moment, I waited until breakfast Saturday morning. I stood and waited until all eyes were on me. Then with a big smile I said, "I wish I owned this house." They just looked at me. Mrs. de los Santos said, "It's a very lovely house. Lots of people would like to own it." My smile faltered. It hadn't worked. I spoke again, this time a little louder. "I wish I owned this house right now and had the deed in my hand." I held up an empty hand. Mrs. de los Santos put down her fork. "Josh, sit and eat your food, please. You're 16, you won't be owning a house anytime soon." I sat feeling shame rise up in me. That stupid monkey made me look like an idiot. After breakfast, I went to my room. "Show yourself, monkey." That putrid smell filled the room. I nearly yelled when I saw the stuffed abomination on my bed. "Gross, dude, I have to sleep there. Why aren't you doing your job? I need those wishes." It stared at me with its creepy little eyes. "Where is my food, master? You said you were pleased, but you did not give me my food." I was pissed. "So that's what this is all about. You want some milk and bread. Just get your own." It smiled, and it was not a nice smile. "I'll see you in hell, Josh." And then it was gone. The only thing left was the faint smell it left behind. I felt a chill run down my back. Ice-cold fear flooded my spine. Things were about to get really bad. I wanted to call my mom, but the ocean had ruined my phone, and I didn't know her number. Walking home would take hours, and I wasn't feeling up to that. I hated living in a car-centric society. I wanted to wish for a driver's license, but I was scared the monkey would mess it up somehow. I was stuck. My only option was to take Jack or Jill's car. I summarized Jill wouldn't be needing her Jeep anytime soon. I found the keys on her dresser. It was a little weird going in her room. I wasn't sure what I expected, but paintings of horses and family portraits surely wasn't it. I managed to make it to the garage without being seen. This family really hated the environment. Parked between Jack's Mustang and Jill's Jeep was Mrs. de los Santos' Escalade. They were single-handedly undoing any bit of good I might ever do. Screw the 1%. I got in the Jeep, put the keys in the ignition and turned it. Nothing happened. I wiggled the stick in the middle, and still nothing happened. After a few minutes of pushing buttons and flipping switches, I gave up. I would have to get a different set of keys. I nearly ran into Jack as I was leaving the garage. I managed to smoothly hide the keys from him. "Hey Josh, I was actually looking for you." He held up my phone. "I found this on the bathroom counter. I was able to take it apart and clean it out. It's charged and working again." I took the phone tentatively, half expecting a trick. "How would you know how to do that?" I asked. Jack shrugged. "I'm 2 years into my electrical engineering degree, but honestly, it's pretty simple. Just a couple corroded connections. Go ahead and try it. Everything should work again." He left and I turned on my phone. Sure enough, it booted up, and despite a little fog in the camera lens, it seemed to be working fine. I tried calling my mom, but the call went to voicemail. I wanted to say something to her, something that would cause her to tell me everything was ok. Instead, I hung up. I was on my way to the spare room when Jack called me over to the living room. He was sitting on the couch next to stiff-necked Jill. On the TV was a news report. There was an ambulance at the high school football field. A reporter was talking to the camera about how a body had been found under the bleachers. She went on about other details that weren't important. Jack spoke. It was Aries. Trevor sent me a snap. They had him on a stretcher. He said he could overhear the medics talking about how he drowned in his own vomit. I felt cold. I had to sit. Even Jill's creepy bloodshot eyes weren't so bad when listening to the drone of the reporter. Then the scene changed. It turned to a place I was very familiar with. My house. Cop cars and ambulances covered the street. Jack froze, his finger above the channel button. The bottom of the screen read, "Second death at local residence. Foul play suspected." I jumped to my feet. What do they mean, second death? Who was the first? Hell, who was the second? I slumped back onto the couch. Jill placed a hand on my shoulder. I elbowed her. I hadn't meant to hit her in the boob, but it was effective as she withdrew her hand instantly. "Hey!" yelled Jack. That had better have been an accident. I think he knew it wasn't, but he also didn't want to start trouble with me. I needed to get home. I was so focused on solving that problem that I almost missed the next story. A body had been found on the roof of the Red Moon Bar and Grill. A body belonging to a fairly well-known Instagram influencer. I swore internally, what if the body still had Audrey's DNA on it? What if they brought her in for questioning and she turned on me? Could I be charged? There was no way to connect me to the body, only Audrey's word. But what if that was enough? Shit was spiraling out of control. I couldn't go to prison. It would kill my career. It would be the end of everything I had built. Jack was talking. I didn't hear him at first. "Yo, Josh, are you listening?" I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. "I'll drive you home, Josh. Come on, let's go." I nodded. I needed to know what happened at my house. Jack patted Jill on the shoulder. "Hang in there. I'll be right back." Weirdos. It didn't take long to get across town in Jack's Ego Mobile. Who buys a green car? Seriously. Jack pulled up to my house. "You gonna be all right, dude? I can hang out for a minute if you need me to." There was still a news van parked in front of my house. The fire trucks and ambulances had left, but cops were everywhere. Remembering the body Audrey had drug into the boathouse, I began to worry they had made some connection. "Let's just go. I don't want to be here." Jack looked uncertain. "Bro, it's ought to be scared. This isn't a normal thing for a teenager to go through." I glared back at him. Where did this privileged little prick hit the idea that he knew more about suffering than I did? "Just drive, Jack." Without any more arguing, he did as he was told. When we were just a block from my house, a white SUV pulled behind us. Then another pulled out in front of us. Before I could react, Jack whipped his car onto the sidewalk. I screamed, fearing for my life. "What are you doing?" A rapid succession of pops filled the air. The back window broke, and glass rained down on us. I looked out the rear and saw one of the SUVs right behind us and gaining fast. They were shooting at us. A guy with face and neck tattoos was standing up in the sunroof holding a gun. More pops rang out. I heard bullets thunk into the metal body of the car. At least it now had justification for the crappy misspelled decals saying "bullet" on the side. Tires screeched, and the air smelled like burnt rubber as Jack hit the road again. My head was thrown painfully against the back of the seat. Jack weaved his way through streets and parking lots, our pursuers gradually falling behind. As if following a command, they both turned off from chasing us. I looked around us. "I think they've had enough," I said. Jack jerked his head in my direction. "Was that because of you? Did you get involved in something?" The way he demanded answers rubbed me the wrong way. "Of course not," I insisted. Jack was quiet. Finally, he stopped the car. "I'm going to the police. Are you coming with?" The way he said it without looking at me made it feel like an accusation. I threw open the door and jumped out of the smoking POS. "I'll walk from here. You go do whatever it is you think you need to." Jack didn't hesitate. He drove off at quick enough pace to close the door. Whatever, I didn't need his car. His house was just up the road. I would go there, retrieve my money, and leave town. It didn't take a genius to figure out my parents were gone. Audrey was likely heading to prison, and people were going to start pointing fingers at anyone who was different. And I was very different from all the losers in this town. Maybe I hadn't noticed them parked outside. Maybe they had hidden their cars. Either way, I walked right into the De Los Santos house with my guard down. My quick wit saved me, though. I heard voices coming from the living room, wanting to know what they were saying. And if it was about me, I crept closer. "Listen, girl, you can talk, or we can make you talk," said a rough voice. A second, more mellow voice spoke up. "Come on, man. Can't you see her jaw is wired shut? She can't say anything." There was a pained whimper, then the second voice spoke again. "Dude, wired shut. Undoing the wiring isn't going to fix whatever is broken. Get a pen and paper." The first man simple grunted. Footsteps led away. The remaining man spoke in a softer voice. Listen, kid, he's gonna come back, and if you don't give him what he wants, he's going to hurt you or worse. We traced the license plate on the Mustang to this address. We just want what's ours. Can you help with that? The money, they were here to take my money, and that idiot Jack had given them all they needed in order to find me. I needed to go. I needed to get to the money before anyone else ratted me out. If they took it, I would be stuck in this dead-end town. I ran for the stairs. They must have been distracted because no one came after me. I pulled the money out from under my bed. It was all there. I could still pull this off. Knowing Jill had likely cracked by now, I made my way out the window and onto the roof. Rich assholes like the De Los Santos like to have trees all around their house. I used one of them to climb down. I just needed a way out of town now. Surely the roads would be a mess, but the water wouldn't. With a hint of a plan in my head, I made my way down the streets and towards the waterfront. I thought I heard a female scream, but I could have been mistaken. There was no way Jill would have waited that long to give me up. When I reached the shoreline, I saw what I needed, a speedboat at the fuel station. The owner was inside the shack talking with the deadbeat service provider. I could do it. I had to do it. Anyone in my position would do the same. I couldn't go to jail. I couldn't give up my money. No, I deserved a future. And if that meant depriving some rich guy of his toy, then I morally had no choice. It was easier than I had expected. The boat was idling with just a single bow rope holding it. I was halfway across the marina before anyone even noticed. By that point, it was too late. I felt the breeze in my face. I started to laugh. Despite the odds being against me, despite the system being rigged to hold me down, I had done it. I was going to succeed. Out of curiosity, I opened the glove box. I wanted to know who the previous owner had been. Inside was a note. It was handwritten on old parchment. Run ye east or west, never shall you rest. My pound of flesh I shall consume, until you, Master Josh, approach your doom. That damn monkey wasn't going to let me escape. Pixie Eaters Anonymous. If anyone had told me a year ago that I'd be sitting in a Magic Anonymous meeting, I would have laughed and said there's no such thing. Yet here I am, studying the faint glow in my hands, waiting for it to fade away for good. My body is a lead balloon, heavy yet hollow and waiting for that next hit of fairy blood, so the glow can come back, and all the perks with it. Never was a junkie of any sort. I had what one person I met called a PhD, pothead degree, but that was about it. I hate how drinking alcohol makes me feel, and I had experimented with hard drugs, but never really liked them. But that fairy blood, oh my God, it's not just euphoria. It's asterisk power asterisk, and the taste of a deity's feasts that linger for weeks. At first anyway, tolerance builds up quickly, and when once you needed one fairy to last a month, now it's 3 fairies a week. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's slow down and start at the beginning for the people who may be new here. I had found a bottle of clearly Canadian at the grocery store. Does anyone remember the flavored sparkling water back in the late 1990s? Well, someone pointed me in the direction where I could get some, and as luck would have it, I got the last bottle. At a friend's house putting my PhD to good use, clumsy me spilled the drink all over the hardwood floor. I apologized profusely, huffing as I got up to get a towel, because I didn't know when I'd be able to get my hands on another bottle. My friend waved his hand and smiled, giving me a quick, no worries, and guided me to sit down. He then walked up to the spill, holding his hands directly over it, and a bright glow emanated from his hands as the liquid reversed course back into the bottle. It then righted itself on the completely dry floor. He picked it up and handed it to me. I was flabbergasted. How on earth did you do that? He gave a smile and a wink, and told me, it's a secret. After everyone else had left, I stayed behind to help with cleanup. He asked me how I liked his little parlor trick. So did you reverse time or something? Is Charmed a documentary? He let out a laugh. You know how you always insist fairies are real. He asked me, opening the cabinet and moving stuff around to get to the back. He pulled out a large jar set up like a terrarium with 2 fairies fluttering around in it. The jar was maybe big enough to hold a gallon worth of liquid. I stepped closer, tapping lightly on the glass. A bright light flashed, and a small crack appeared on the side. Oh, it's a good thing these are going to be used up. Don't do that, they're stronger than they look. And little pissants too, even when they're not captured. He put the jar down and grabbed a syringe, filling it with sugar water. I took a closer look as he gave them their treat. They looked like little green men with transparent butterfly wings outlined in luminescence. Their faces were twisted in malice and mischief. You caught yourself some pixies. He nodded and stayed silent as he waited. The pixies fell asleep in their leaves. It was at this point that he pulled out a needle and syringe, draining them to complete exsanguination. They popped after their last drop was taken, nothing but dust. He put the blood into 2 glasses and filled them with orange juice. I always get the best results from juices with citrus, he told me, handing me my cup. Now you're probably thinking I'm horrified at this, but to be completely honest, there are not very many non-malevolent fairies out there. Not the same as Ben, benevolent, of which there are even fewer, and I didn't see this carnivorous act as too far out there. And they were not going to be coming to my house. It was the tastiest orange juice I had ever had the pleasure to sip. I opened the fridge to see it was just a carton of Minute Maid, but it tasted like heaven in my mouth. He laughed. Yeah, I've been doing this for 6 months, and I still have to check. Do you capture the fairies yourself? He nodded, finished his glass, then rinsed it out. He stood and waited for me. I did not keep him waiting long. You'll want to sit down for the first couple of minutes, he told me, rushing to the couch. As if on cue, my legs stopped working and I dropped to the floor. I was shaking, but it was not distressful. I felt the euphoria and power that I had spoken of earlier going through my bloodstream, seeping into my organs. It was like my body was rebuilding itself. When it was complete, I stood up, a brand new person. Yeah, it hits hard the first time, he tells me. He grabbed my hands and rotated them palm facing up. They emanated a slight glow. He closed my palms, then opened his. His glow was brighter, almost covering his hands completely. You have their power now. You can break something without touching it, like the fairy did. Please don't do that here. You can reverse time, like I did. You can move stuff without going near it. I looked down and concentrated, watching as the glow ebbed on my skin. An instant later, he shouted, "Stop," urgently curling my fingers over my palms. This is dangerous, you have to let me finish. Sorry. He stood in silence for a second. I could tell by the look on his face, he was trying to figure out how to teach me. The best way I can put it, he began, is you can't think too much about it. Has to be like second nature. Like moving your arms and legs. You don't think about it longer than it takes to decide you want to move them. My expression must have betrayed my confusion. He kept his grip on my hands. Keep these closed. We're going to the park, and I'm showing you how to do this. I nodded. Then he let me go and grabbed his keys. We walked out the door to his truck. He opened the door for me so I could keep my palms shut, and I fumbled my way into the passenger seat. And when we had gotten to the park, he drove out to the field where the neighborhood kids play football and soccer and put his truck in park. Hands closed tightly into fists, I followed him to an old tree about 4 feet thick. He gave me the okay to open my hands and told me to aim at the tree. I did as he said, the glow in my hands getting brighter, and then suddenly breaking out and cracking the tree like a bolt of lightning. Oh, I screamed. I was trying to reverse time. Another brought light. Then the crack in the tree was gone. I clamped my hands shut. Maybe we should have meditated before I gave you the fairy blood. You think so? Maybe. Okay, I deserve that. Equals. It had taken all night and half the day for me to get the hang of it. Needs to be second nature, but I had finally figured out exactly how that worked. Like the other drugs, I wasn't too incredibly fond of the side effects. It would be a little more than a month before the desired effects wore off, dimming little by little as days passed. The withdrawal hit like a freight train. I could feel my body breaking down, and my brain was screaming for that glow. I returned to my friend's house. He has been expecting me, and already had a jar out filled with fairies. They had already fallen asleep from the sugar water. So does it make you psychic too? No, but it enhances your memory, and I remember what it was like to come down the first time. He drained 2 fairies to my one, explaining that it's not as strong for him anymore with just one. I was prepared for the initial hit this time, and sat down quickly. It didn't hit me as hard. I probably could have stood with the grace of a newborn calf had I tried, but I stayed seated instead until the feeling passed. I showed him the trick I learned to light candles with my glows. He used telekinesis to make pictures with the candles as he juggled them in the air. We talked and smoked. He told me he always had a crush on me. I said I liked him too, but never had the guts to say anything. We took our interpersonal relationships to that level and fell asleep tangled into each other. And then we were woken up by the rest of the pixies as C or E am I in me. He gave them more sugar water and put them in the back of the cabinet when they passed out. Do they eat anything else? Flower nectar in the wild. Do you want to catch some? I nodded excitedly. Then he told me it would have to wait till dusk. Heh. So we spent the rest of the day enjoying each other's company in bed and out. When it started to get darker, he pulled out another terrarium jar and grabbed his keys, motioning for me to follow. We returned to the old tree where he took me the first night. He walked me around it and showed me a mushroom ring hiding behind the leaves. Do not do this unless you have some decent semblance of power, he warned. You consume fairy folklore like fish consume water. I know you know how pixies are. Indeed I do. I stepped forward, lifting my foot to enter the circle. His hand gripped right around my arm, and he pulled me back. What are you thinking? Your impulsiveness is part of your charm, but it's going to get you in trouble. Never walk into a fairy circle. They will snatch you right up. You know better. I know you know better. I stood still as the tree, afraid to move. How close did I just get to being taken away? And he's right. What exactly was I thinking? He stretched my hands out, palms facing up, just like that first night. Can you control the brightness of your glow? He asked. After I nodded, he said, good, now make it dim, and brighten it slightly. Do it over and over like a fading pulse. I did as he said, and he did the same. Soon I heard a fluttering of small wings, then another set, then another. Put the light out, he whispered as he did the same for himself. The sound of wings everywhere was deafening. He grabbed the jar and started stalking the sounds, putting the jar down gingerly on the leaves, then snatching it back up at warp speed. He had caught 2 pixies. Light emanated in the jar, and a crack much bigger than the one I had seen the first night spread across the glass. It seemed logical that they got more power from the nectar out in the wild. He bumped against me and guided me away. I felt a sharp pressure on my wrist and squeaked, slapping the point of the pain. Smeared on my palm was a pixie. I licked up its blood and spit out its corpse. What the lore doesn't tell you is that it's like an insect/mammal hybrid. Equals. The place where the fairy bit me looked like a bad tattoo until it healed up. If you look at my wrist, you can see where it ruined my mortis key tattoo. I'm real disappointed about that. Though not as much as the fact that the way the skin healed seems to let off a signal for the other pixies and set me to have more tattoos, so I can no longer go out fairy hunting. My lover and I stay in the same apartment now, and he keeps me well supplied. We both have developed a tolerance, though he is building his much quicker than I. Then the accident happened. He called it the fairy's revenge last night. His brakes stopped working at the most inopportune moment. But then is there ever a good moment for that to happen? The doctor says the chances of him walking again are slim to none. He is terrified and darkened by the experience. Inspection of the car showed that the brake lines were chewed through by some type of small animal. Sure, animal. And me. I can't stand to see him like this. I tried to reverse time to take it all away, but nothing happened as the glow has faded from me too much. I tried catching fairies myself, but as you can see from the bruises all over my body, that did not go well. Then I was guided here, to Magic Anonymous, where I'm told I can get past this addiction with love and support from those who have been there. But I'll be honest with you, I'm here to find someone looking to relapse, who wants to help me save my boyfriend and catch some fairies for me. Pixie Eaters Anonymous. If anyone had told me a year ago that I'd be sitting in a Magic Anonymous meeting, I would have laughed and said there's no such thing. Yet here I am, studying the faint glow in my hands, waiting for it to fade away for good. My body is a lead balloon, heavy yet hollow and waiting for that next hit of fairy blood, so the glow can come back, and all the perks with it. Never was a junkie of any sort. I had what one person I met called a 3D pothead degree, but that was about it. I hate how drinking alcohol makes me feel, and I had experimented with hard drugs, but never really liked them. But that fairy blood, oh my God. It's not just euphoria. It's asterisk power asterisk, and the taste of a deity's feasts that linger for weeks. At first anyway. Tolerance builds up quickly, and when once you needed one fairy to last a month, now it's 3 fairies a week. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's slow down and start at the beginning for the people who may be new here. I had found a bottle of clearly Canadian at the grocery store. Does anyone remember the flavored sparkling water back in the late 1990s? Well, someone pointed me in the direction where I could get some. And as luck would have it, I got the last bottle. At a friend's house, putting my PhD to good use, clumsy me spilled the drink all over the hardwood floor. I apologized profusely, huffing as I got up to get a towel, because I didn't know when I'd be able to get my hands on another bottle. My friend waved his hand and smiled, giving me a quick, no worries, and guided me to sit down. He then walked up to the spill, holding his hands directly over it, and a bright glow emanated from his hands as the liquid reversed course back into the bottle. It then righted itself on the completely dry floor. He picked it up and handed it to me. I was flabbergasted. How on earth did you do that? He gave a smile and a wink and told me it's a secret. After everyone else had left, I stayed behind to help with cleanup. He asked me how I liked his little parlor trick. So did you reverse time or something? Is Charmed a documentary? He let out a laugh. You know how you always insist fairies are real? He asked me, opening the cabinet and moving stuff around to get to the back. He pulled out a large jar set up like a terrarium with 2 fairies fluttering around in it. The jar was maybe big enough to hold a gallon worth of liquid. I stepped closer, tapping lightly on the glass. A bright light flashed, and a small crack appeared on the side. Oh, it's a good thing these are going to be used up. Don't do that, they're stronger than they look. And little pissants too, even when they're not captured. He put the jar down and grabbed a syringe, filling it with sugar water. I took a closer look as he gave them their treat. They looked like little green men with transparent butterfly wings outlined in luminescence. Their faces were twisted in malice and mischief. You caught yourself some pixies. He nodded and stayed silent as he waited. The pixies fell asleep in their leaves. It was at this point that he pulled out a needle and syringe, draining them to complete exsanguination. They popped after their last drop was taken, nothing but dust. He put the blood into 2 glasses and filled them with orange juice. I always get the best results from juices with citrus, he told me, handing me my cup. Now you're probably thinking I'm horrified at this, but to be completely honest, there are not very many non-malevolent fairies out there, not the same as Ben. Benevolent, of which there are even fewer, and I didn't see this carnivorous act as too far out there. And they were not going to be coming to my house. It was the tastiest orange juice I had ever had the pleasure to sip. I opened the fridge to see it was just a carton of Minute Maid, but it tasted like heaven in my mouth. He laughed. Yeah, I've been doing this for 6 months, and I still have to check. Do you capture the fairies yourself? He nodded, finished his glass, then rinsed it out. He stood and waited for me. I did not keep him waiting long. You'll want to sit down for the first couple of minutes, he told me, rushing to the couch. As if on cue, my legs stopped working and I dropped to the floor. I was shaking, but it was not distressful. I felt the euphoria and power that I had spoken of earlier going through my bloodstream, seeping into my organs. It was like my body was rebuilding itself. When it was complete, I stood up, a brand new person. Yeah, it hits hard the first time, he tells me. He grabbed my hands and rotated them palm facing up. They emanated a slight glow. He closed my palms, then opened his. His glow was brighter, almost covering his hands completely. You have their power now. You can break something without touching it, like the fairy did. Please don't do that here. You can reverse time, like I did. You can move stuff without going near it. I looked down and concentrated, watching as the glow ebbed on my skin. An instant later, he shouted, "Stop," urgently curling my fingers over my palms. This is dangerous. You have to let me finish. Sorry. He stood in silence for a second. I could tell by the look on his face, he was trying to figure out how to teach me. The best way I can put it, he began, is you can't think too much about it. Has to be like second nature. Like moving your arms and legs. You don't think about it longer than it takes to decide you want to move them. My expression must have betrayed my confusion. He kept his grip on my hands. Keep these close. We're going to the park. And I'm showing you how to do this. I nodded. Then he let me go and grabbed his keys. We walked out the door to his truck. He opened the door for me so I could keep my palms shut. And I fumbled my way into the passenger seat. And when we had gotten to the park, he drove out to the field where the neighborhood kids play football and soccer and put his truck in park. Hands closed tightly into fists. I followed him to an old tree about 4 feet thick. He gave me the okay to open my hands and told me to aim at the tree. I did as he said, the glow in my hands getting brighter, and then suddenly breaking out and cracking the tree like a bolt of lightning. Oh, I screamed. I was trying to reverse time. Another bright light. Then the crack in the tree was gone. I clamped my hands shut. Maybe we should have meditated before I gave you the fairy blood. You think so, maybe. Okay, I deserve that. Equals. It had taken all night and half the day for me to get the hang of it. Needs to be second nature, but I had finally figured out exactly how that worked. Like the other drugs, I wasn't too incredibly fond of the side effects. It would be a little more than a month before the desired effects wore off. Dimming little by little as days passed, the withdrawal hit like a freight train. I could feel my body breaking down, and my brain was screaming for that glow. I returned to my friend's house. He has been expecting me, and already had a jar out filled with fairies. They had already fallen asleep from the sugar water. So does it make you psychic too? No, but it enhances your memory, and I remember what it was like to come down the first time. He drained 2 fairies to my one, explaining that it's not as strong for him anymore with just one. I was prepared for the initial hit this time, and sat down quickly. It didn't hit me as hard. I probably could have stood with the grace of a newborn calf had I tried, but I stayed seated instead until the feeling passed. I showed him the trick I learned to light candles with my glows. He used telekinesis to make pictures with the candles as he juggled them in the air. We talked and smoked. He told me he always had a crush on me. I said I liked him too, but never had the guts to say anything. We took our interpersonal relationships to that level and fell asleep tangled into each other. And then we were woken up by the rest of the pixies as CREMIND. He gave them more sugar water and put them in the back of the cabinet when they passed out. Do they eat anything else? Flower nectar in the wild. Do you want to catch some? I nodded excitedly. Then he told me it would have to wait till dusk. Heh. So we spent the rest of the day enjoying each other's company in bed and out. When it started to get darker, he pulled out another terrarium jar and grabbed his keys, motioning for me to follow. We returned to the old tree where he took me the first night. He walked me around it and showed me a mushroom ring hiding behind the leaves. Do not do this unless you have some decent semblance of power, he warned. You consume fairy folklore like fish consume water. I know you know how pixies are. Indeed I do. I stepped forward, lifting my foot to enter the circle. His hand gripped right around my arm and he pulled me back. What are you thinking? Your impulsiveness is part of your charm, but it's going to get you in trouble. Never walk into a fairy circle. They will snatch you right up. You know better. I know you know better. I stood still as the tree, afraid to move. How close did I just get to being taken away? And he's right. What exactly was I thinking? He stretched my hands out, palms facing up, just like that first night. Can you control the brightness of your glow? He asked. After I nodded, he said, good. Now make it dim and brighten it slightly. Do it over and over like a fading pulse. I did as he said, and he did the same. Soon I heard a fluttering of small wings, then another set, then another. Put the light out, he whispered as he did the same for himself. The sound of wings everywhere was deafening. He grabbed the jar and started stalking the sounds, putting the jar down gingerly on the leaves, then snatching it back up at warp speed. He had caught 2 pixies. Light emanated in the jar, and a crack much bigger than the one I had seen the first night spread across the glass. It seemed logical that they got more power from the nectar out in the wild. He bumped against me and guided me away. I felt a sharp pressure on my wrist and squeaked, slapping the point of the pain. Smeared on my palm was a pixie. I licked up its blood and spit out its corpse. What the lore doesn't tell you is that it's like an insect/mammal hybrid. Equals. The place where the fairy bit me looked like a bad tattoo until it healed up. If you look at my wrist, you can see where it ruined my mortis key tattoo. I'm real disappointed about that. Though not as much as the fact that the way the skin healed seems to let off a signal for the other pixies and set me to have more tattoos, so I can no longer go out fairy hunting. My lover and I stay in the same apartment now, and he keeps me well supplied. We both have developed a tolerance, though he is building his much quicker than I. Then the accident happened. He called it the fairy's revenge last night. His brakes stopped working at the most inopportune moment, but then is there ever a good moment for that to happen? The doctor says the chances of him walking again are slim to none. He is terrified and darkened by the experience. Inspection of the car showed that the brake lines were chewed through by some type of small animal. Sure, animal. And me, I can't stand to see him like this. I tried to reverse time to take it all away, but nothing happened as the glow has faded from me too much. I tried catching fairies myself, but as you can see from the bruises all over my body, that did not go well. Then I was guided here, to Magic Anonymous, where I'm told I can get past this addiction with love and support from those who have been there. But I'll be honest with you, I'm here to find someone looking to relapse, who wants to help me save my boyfriend and catch some fairies for me. Gestation. Excerpts from a diary. I don't know what to do anymore. Today marks exactly 2 months since my mother died. In this time, I believe I could count on merely one hand how many times I have left our apartment. I'm aware that I should get outside more. I know the city is teeming with opportunity and that I should be working, but I just can't seem to bring myself to. I haven't seen any of my massage clients in this time. Not only that, but I've entirely ignored them. And don't even get me started on hobbies or otherwise. I haven't gone for a run or picked up a single book since it happened. In fact, I've barely left my bedroom. It's a painful and strained feeling, day in and day out. I know I should do something, anything, and part of me strongly wants to. I want to be outside, to try and feel some semblance of life again. But a larger part of me can't handle the idea of leaving my bedside and entering a world where she is no longer there. Just being in the other rooms in the apartment feels like too much. Stepping outside and letting other people see this new version of myself with a vital piece missing. That idea is unbearable. My bed has become the path of least resistance, so that is where I stay. August 30th. It's currently 5:00 a.m. I'd like to make a vow to myself to just go to the grocery store today. I can't believe it, but I'm getting tired of takeout. September 1st. Something exciting happened today. Elaine stopped by. Elaine is one of the very few friends I have that still lives in Boston. Now that I write of it, she might be the only one. Most of everyone else I know has married and moved farther away. But Elaine and her boyfriend claim to love it here, so they've stayed. I hadn't told her about my mom, but I suppose she found out through mutual acquaintances. She came straight over, we talked, and then she dragged me out for coffee to talk some more. At first I felt a great reluctance, but eventually the embrace of a friend seemed to soothe me. I didn't feel the overwhelming urge to return home. I told her everything that I felt able to. I told her about taking care of Mom, and even about trying to contact my dad to give him the news, to no avail, obviously. Trying to reach him was a mistake, but most of all, I told her about the alienation, that I don't feel at home in my own apartment, and that the city feels so foreign. I think I made it sound like I wanted to get away, which might be true, because after a period of silence, she shared an idea with me. Her boyfriend's parents, who seem quite well off, own a townhouse in Vermont that they tend to use in the summer months as a getaway. If she talked to them, she said, I might be able to stay there for a while. It's in a town called Londonville. I'd never heard of Londonville before, but apparently it's a very small town near the center of the state, and it's surrounded by beautiful forest. Her words to describe it were small and sleepy. When I mentioned that I'd like to think about it for a few days, she told me the offer is open anytime. I must admit, it feels good to have a friend on my side right now. And while the idea of taking off for a few weeks or months does bring me some measure of guilt, I can't help but feel excited about the prospect. September 4th. It's been especially difficult to leave the bed again today. I did talk to Elaine a bit more about the idea yesterday. According to her boyfriend, the town has a high population of elderly, retired folk who like living near nature. As far as I'm concerned, that's another point for Londonville. I could probably get massage clients up there with a little advertising. September 7th. I called Elaine and told her I'd like to do it. With the summer months nearing an end, she let me know that any time next week should suffice. September 12th. All my things are packed. The place is apparently furnished, so I went with mostly the essentials. The massage table will be a little difficult to fit in the car, but I think I can manage. I debated on whether I should take anything of my mother's with me. Most of her things are certainly safer at home until I decide what to do with them. However, I want a piece of her to be with me while I'm gone. I decided to pack her rosary. I think it's because I would always see her praying with it. She was so deeply religious, although she never tried to convert me. I always thought that was respectful of her, especially in comparison to the other people in her church. She kept it in an ornate box given to her by her pastor. Even if I never use it, I don't think she'd mind me keeping it by my bedside. Our apartment is paid in advance for a few months, so I should be all right to leave. But I've given them the landline number for the Londonville house in case they need me. I'll be by Elaine's place tomorrow to pick up the keys and verify the address. September 14th. Londonville is absolutely gorgeous. This place feels like an outdoorsy introvert's dreamland. The town is located far off the interstate, but near a national forest, so it feels incredibly secluded. Here, despite the seclusion, the central part of the town is actually also quite beautiful. The buildings are mostly colonial style, and I even saw one or two triple-deckers reminiscent of Boston. There's a few shops and restaurants near the center of town, but it's truly very small. I believe there was only a single mercantile and maybe 2 grocery stores. Once you escape the center, it's just beautiful homes spread about, everything partially enclosed by trees. And the trails. I got a map from the mercantile of the surrounding forest, and there are countless trails everywhere. I'll have no shortage of places to explore and be comfortably alone, or so I hope. I don't know how to explain it, but I feel a sense of rejuvenation here. The home that Elaine is letting me stay at is a modestly sized townhome, one of the very few in Londonville, I've learned, and it's quite close to the cutest library I've ever seen. Getting unpacked didn't take long, and I don't want to waste my newfound energy. So as I get settled in, my writing may be a bit sparse. I can only hope the people here are as nice as the scenery. September 20th. There have definitely been some hard moments over the past few days, but overall, I've been feeling much lighter. I've taken the time to visit the local paper's advertising department and placed an ad about my massage practice, and it should show up this Sunday. Scotty's Goods, the sole mercantile store, also agreed to let me leave some business cards there, which was kind of him. He seemed excited to give me his recommendations for what spots he likes around the town and in the woods. Speaking of, I have taken some time to hike and even done a bit of trail running. It's stunning out here. The trees feel abnormally diverse. I passed by oaks, maples, spruce, pines, firs, and even junipers all intermingled with each other. Furthermore, they often leer over the trails, as if they're watching over me. Especially the oaks, which are towering. It all gives off a sense of quietude, as if I'm enclosed and protected. September 24th. I have an interested client already. She saw my cards in the shop, and Scotty told her that I seemed nice. I guess word of mouth works better here, which makes sense. I'll be meeting her on Tuesday. She's a widow named Margaret. The only reason I know that is because she told me that, and much more just over our phone call. I have a feeling she'll be very talkative, and it sounds nice to chat. I look forward to meeting her. September 26th. I met Margaret today. She's oddly comforting. She's in her 80s, with a bad back from both age and working for years on her, now past, husband's farm. It puts a lot of strain on her muscles, so she seemed very appreciative. We talked about her time on the farm, which is nearby, how she spends her days now, and her advice for making myself feel at home in the town, since there aren't many social events. She's a joy to talk to. Honestly, she sort of reminds me of my mom. She's even deeply religious, although not Catholic. She practices something I didn't quite understand. She referred to her practices and her church as New Age spirituality, which I thought sounded damn cool for someone in their 80s. She must have an open mind. She actually invited me to one of her church services tomorrow to meet people. The sermon would be short, she claimed, and there would likely be people around my age to socialize with. The place has an interesting name, One Light Church. I don't think I'll be interested in whatever they preach at One Light, but meeting some more people in the town could be good for me. September 27th. One Light Church was much further from town than I expected. Following the address took me a bit out of town, and down a couple back roads through the woods. It wasn't right off the road either. Instead, there was a parking lot off the road, but a cobbled path deep through the woods led to the church itself. I don't remember seeing it on the trail map. It was magnificently beautiful. It followed a similar colonial style to the town, but far more grand. The building was 3 stories tall and accented with intricate designs in both gold and dark, polished oak. And everything seemed to build up to a massive spire that loomed, seemingly, toward the heavens. The next thing I noticed about it were the trees. The woods surrounding Londonville this time of year are changing to light yellows and deep oranges, save for the evergreens. But every tree near the church, even the oaks, still had rich green leaves. A few of them even seemed to grow from within the foundations of the church, like you see with neglected homes. But here, it seemed fitting, almost intentional. If it wasn't so far from the town, I imagined it would be a centerpiece. As I approached, the church was warm. I don't just mean the inside either. I mean, once I got within a few feet of the church, the chill of the air was ripped away and replaced with a deep and soothing warmth, almost like a caress. The last significant thing I remember about the church was the music. Embarrassingly enough, I don't actually recall what the pastor said during his sermon. Instead, All I could focus on while he spoke was the resounding sound of a piano. It was playing a song I'd never heard before, but it was astonishingly pretty, and it gave me a similar sense of comfort. I sat next to Margaret, who introduced me to a few people and pointed out many more. There were maybe 40 people at the event, but many were prominent members of the town. Both the sheriff and Scotty were there, for example. Apparently they too are devout members of the church. I did eventually speak to the pastor, although not for long. This was fine with me, since I had hardly heard a word that he preached. He seemed perfectly pleasant and very charismatic, but a little rushed to talk to Margaret about private matters. I did mingle with some other people my age, and they invited me out for a drink next weekend. When I left, I realized that I never actually saw a piano. September 28th. I got curious today. I didn't have much else to do, so I decided to stop by the little library and asked for books on the old light church. The librarian did know vaguely about the church, but we couldn't find any books on them or on New Age spiritualism that looked relevant. I suppose it's a local phenomenon. October 3rd. I had another session with Margaret today. I've had 2 others call in about my services since I got here, but they've scheduled me weeks out. So for now, it's just Margaret. Since I had no one else to see today either, I let the session go a little long, and afterwards we just talked. Margaret is clearly a very open person, and she let me know how lonely she gets. Not many people come to see her, so this is some of the little social interaction she gets outside of attending the sermons at One Light. Her husband passed away roughly a decade ago, and she doesn't have any other living relatives. But despite that, she's quite cheery and seems hopeful. October 4th. I returned to One Light at Margaret's request. Although, if I'm being entirely honest with myself, I think I wanted to go back. There's something about the place that is so soothing, like a warm respite from my troubles outside. It's probably just the social aspect. Everyone is very welcoming, and I surely need it. I learned more about the church today. The pastor has no pamphlets or books that he gives out, so I had to learn solely from sermons. The piano played again while he spoke. While I could not see any speakers, I assumed that must be where the sound was coming from. Once again, I'd scarcely heard anything so beautiful. It took constant effort to focus on the sermon. But what I learned was interesting. They believe in reincarnation. Reincarnation. In a church in a little town in Vermont. What are the odds? So yes, they believe that everything we do in this life is a growing process, and that it all leads to our final few days and moments. In these last parts of life, our experiences culminate. And just as each thought now influences the next, our final thoughts in this life go on to influence the start of the next. This means they have a primary focus on what he constantly described as loving growth. I've certainly heard worse things. And again, Margaret and the pastor seemed eager to talk to each other quickly after his speech. October 6th. I had that drink with people from the church. They all drank very little, said they'd like to keep clear minds. But despite that, the bartender seemed so incredibly happy to see them. Everyone did. Really. They radiated charisma. When I tried to bring up the church, I mainly wanted to talk about the piano. They changed the subject rather quickly. One of them told me in private that they preferred to keep the religious talk at the church and practice by living presently outside of it. October 9th. Margaret asked me for a favor after our massage session. It required a bit of an explanation. At One Light, there is a tradition among those that feel they are nearing the end of their lives. At 83, she said, it certainly feels like she is near the end of hers. It is a 3-day event where someone stays alone at the church. They eat, sleep, and meditate or pray there for the entirety of the 3 days. In her words, it's meant to be a period of introspection and a cleansing of the thoughts to prepare for death. You can face your troublesome thoughts and nurture your positive ones in preparation for the eventual rebirth, all in a familiar and sacred environment. She referred to it as a period of gestation, and it is a great honor in the church. The name made me uncomfortable, but the tradition sounded quite nice. The only problem is that Margaret claimed to feel scared. Being alone, she said, was something she didn't want here, near the end of her life. And despite her desire to undergo her gestation, she wanted occasional company. Picturing her alone made me think of my mother once again. I thought of how deeply she seemed to appreciate when I was there to accompany her near the end, and the tranquil look she had in her eyes. I couldn't bear to think of leaving her alone. And I couldn't do it now, either. The next sermon is tomorrow night, and Margaret will begin her stay the night after. There is a bedroom past the door behind the pulpit. The pastor had provided her with a key to the church to leave and lock it, in case of emergencies. Margaret has preemptively made me a copy. October 10th. The deep warmth and comfort of the church was palpable this evening. The piano echoed subtle vibrations within my bones. At times, I struggled to even stay awake. Social embarrassment was the only thing that kept me from laying on the pews and slipping away. Nobody else seemed as tired as I was. I could not focus on the sermon. But I did notice that he spent much of his speech talking seemingly directly to Margaret. I'm currently writing this before bed. For the first time since leaving for Vermont, I decided to take out my mother's rosary, just to look at it. The centerpiece has a small crack down the center of the Virgin Mary. I feel terrible. I must not have packed it as well as I had thought. October 11th. Once evening turned to night, I made my way to the church. I decided to wait until dark so Margaret could get settled into her practices before I showed up. The parking lot was empty, as was the trail. I suppose it should be like this for 3 days. When I entered the church, however, I was surprised to find all of the lights still on, and the heat that radiated from and within the church was stronger than before. It was still pleasant, but bordered on feverish. My steps echoed as I made my way to the back of the pulpit. There was a simple and rustic wooden door there. Even if Margaret had not told me where her room was, I feel that I would have made my way there anyway. The door had an elder to it. When I opened the door, it was dark, but not entirely unlighted. I could make out the vague form of the room. It was quite large, maybe 20 feet back, and a little less across. But it was very, very plain. The floor, walls, and ceiling were all made of a loose gray cobble brick. It felt ancient and decrepit, far older than the decor in the rest of the church. Stranger still, there was no furniture. The room was entirely empty, except for a tall lamp kept just inside, by the door. In the back of the room, where the light scarcely reached, I saw what seemed to be the dark, loose form of Margaret. Her eyes barely gleamed in the dark, but her silhouette seemed to drape across the ground and low part of the back wall. There was no greeting or movement, merely the dull gleam of eyes. All felt amiss. I pulled the chain on the lamp, and the warmth of the church immediately left me. Margaret sat against the back wall of the room, her upper body hunched and leaning to the side. Her eyes and mouth hummed agape, and she seemed to stare right through me. The scene surrounding her took time for my mind to process. There were great mounds of flesh and tissue protruding from parts of the wall and floor, and they wrapped themselves around her. And as I stared, I began to make out specific parts of the mass. Meaty arms with dozens of attached, jaundiced eyes grabbed Margaret's side and neck. A hairy mass of skin with jutting teeth had latched itself onto her legs. A long, brawny robe of flesh snaked its way into her dress shirt, and I could see the bulbous lump ended at her abdomen. It was attached like some mockery of an umbilical cord. The whole scene looked like a dozen humans had been pulsed in a mixer, and the result had wrapped itself around Margaret. The longer I stared, the more I saw, and the faster my heart began to beat. My body did not know what to do. My arms wanted to pull the chain once more and hide the sight in the shadow. Maybe the balmy comfort of the church would return. My legs wanted to send me running, but somehow I stayed firmly planted. The mass rhythmically pulsed. Just when it felt like I could take no more, the sight changed. In a mere moment, my perception seemed to shift, and I saw it all differently. There was no mass of flesh, no pulp or marrow. Instead, there were large tree roots that seemed to grow from the walls. They crawled along the room, and Margaret sat upright in the midst of them. Her legs were crossed, and she was in an almost meditative pose. She then began to speak, and asked me to take a seat. My feelings of apprehension and trepidation had seemed to subside, and were replaced again with a calm serenity. So I sat. The hour that preceded was a conversation between Margaret and I, wherein she told me how lovely she felt there. While the room may be gloomy, she had never felt so present-minded or connected with the world. I mostly listened, as I felt too entranced by her to speak. What I remember the most is that she told me that, beyond any doubt, she could feel her rebirth beginning. When I left, I noticed some of the roots had grown up a bit and were caressing the edges of my shoes. I felt flattered. I'll be returning tomorrow night, October 12th. Margaret has never looked happier. When I entered her room this evening, she looked absolutely beautiful. The roots were still there, and they coiled themselves around her even further. But Margaret was without most of her skin, and most of her muscle tissue had atrophied. Other parts of her were missing as well. She had no bottom jaw or teeth, and only one eye remained. Her sinewy husk seemed to stare at me through that eye, and when I looked into it, her elation seemed to spill into me. We didn't talk. Instead, I watched and smiled, and she occasionally blinked. October 13th. Margaret was not there on the third day. At first I had been disappointed, as I knew this meant I would not see Margaret again. But then I realized she had left this world in unmitigated peace, and I began to feel quite happy for her. Instead of leaving, I decided to sit where she had previously occupied and reflect. I thought about a great many things, about the kind of life I had led so far, about the wondrous look I had seen in Margaret's eye. But most of all, I thought about my mother. While encased by the gentle warmth of the church, I recollected memories both beautiful and sorrowful that I shared with her. No matter the memory, they were all sacred, and as I thought about the end of her own life, I remembered how she acted. Even in her last days, I couldn't leave her side without letting me know how loved I was. She never became anything less than my loving mother, and I realized she left her life with far more grace than most could ever hope for. I realized that under the gentle caress of death, she had slipped away without fear, and if she was rebirthed, it would be as another beautiful person. I could only feel happy for her, and for having loved her as long as I did. All would be okay. When I left, the walls seemed to lowly and rhythmically rumble, like a heartbeat deep within the bones of the church. October 20th. I've been to 2 sermons now since seeing the back room of One Light Church. I no longer hear the piano or the pastor. Instead, I merely enjoy the church's nurturing warmth. And while I sit, I hear the deep-seated heartbeat. I cannot tell where it comes from, if it is Margaret's, my own, or something yet unfathomed. I don't need to know yet. For now, I just listen. I still have the key. Soon, when I am ready, I will spend my final days in the room behind the pulpit. Girls have gone missing in my town. Hello, Reddit. I need to talk about something that's been going on for months now, but I think some background is important. I live in a small town where everyone knows everyone. The type of town where not getting a casserole when you move in means no one wants you around, and you should start saving up to move away. I've lived here my whole life. So have all my friends and family. Most everyone is a farmer, and we all get along well. We see each other at church every Sunday, attend barbecues and events, and kids can play outside with no worries about kidnapping. It was a good life. Then March 23rd came. 9-year-old Anna Moore's parents went to go wake her and came across a truly horrendous sight. Her room was almost the same as the night before. Books on insects on the floor, clothes and papers littering her desk, unfinished homework scattered about. Her blankets were in place, as though she was still sleeping. Her worn-out butterfly plush was ripped apart, and its wings had been placed on her pillows. Her dresser had one drawer open, and some clothes had been taken. Anna had been a bright young girl, so upbeat and friendly. She loved insects and could always been seen trying to catch one on her hand. She even liked roaches. I'm twice her age, and I still scream when I see one. It didn't matter how much of a nuisance the bug could be, she loved them. I loved babysitting her. Her mother's scream has never left my mind. I was walking some dogs when I heard it. You know what rabbits sound like when they scream. That was it. Just inhuman and horrific. Her father and brother would go out every night with their shotguns and rifles to try and find her. They'd come to my father's bar afterwards with defeated expressions. Defeated isn't even the right word, but I doubt there's a word in any language to get the point across. May 8th. God, help me. Calla Dollinganger was next. She and her sister, Marie, were 17 at the time. They were both the sweetest people I'd ever met. They'd always perform at gatherings, and the whole town loved them. Calla was so cheerful and wonderful, and I miss her every single day. Whatever it was that took her, she didn't deserve it. She had gone missing while camping with some friends. Ben, her ex-boyfriend, had said that she went back to her car to get something and never returned. Everyone searched for her, but all they found were scraps of fabric, strands of her black hair on branches, and her favorite sunglasses. Those red heart frames were smashed to bits. Later on, they said, they heard her voice calling out to them, as sweetly as always, but it would get farther and farther away as they got closer. Mary was inconsolable. I remember I tried to give her my condolences on the last day of school, and she just shoved me down. I hope you're next, Nola. She had hissed out. Bring her back. Don't think badly of her, please. Calla was her favorite person in the whole world. The silent bark and the unknown. When the clock struck 11 p.m., my body succumbed to exhaustion, like a signal lost in static. The lack of sleep weighed heavily on me, pulling me deeper into the plush embrace of the couch. My muscles melted into the cushions as my eyelids, heavy as lead, began to close. Just as I was on the brink of surrendering to sleep, the quiet stillness of the night was shattered by the piercing bark of my neighbor's dog. The sound was unnervingly loud, almost as though it were coming from inside my house. I wanted to move, to investigate, but my body felt immobilized, as though turned to stone. Desperately, I pinched my fingers and bit my lip, trying to summon the strength to rise. The dog's barking ceased abruptly, replaced by an eerie whimper, then an unnatural silence. The quiet was deafening, amplifying my unease. My mind raced as I realized that in all the weeks of its relentless barking, the dog had never stopped so suddenly. Then I heard it, the faint rustling of leaves in my yard, like something moving stealthily among the plants. A surge of adrenaline jolted me upright, and I stumbled to the window to see what was happening. My heart pounded as I peered outside. There it was. A hunched figure moved sluggishly across my lawn, its form grotesque and otherworldly. Its skin was an unnatural purple hue, covered in fine, bristly hairs. Crimson-red eyes glowed with a menacing intensity, and the creature's face. It had too many eyes. A suffocating dread gripped me as its aura pressed heavily against my senses, paralyzing me momentarily. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone and snapped a photo. Hours passed as I sat frozen in the same spot, staring at the empty yard where the creature had been. Though it was gone, its image was seared into my mind. I couldn't make sense of what I'd seen. Could anyone even believe me if I told them? The line between reality and nightmare blurred, leaving me questioning my sanity. The false angel. It was a cold, foggy winter morning, and the darkness still clung to the sky. Around 4:30 a.m., a sudden radiant light pierced through the heavy mist. My phone buzzed with a text from a friend. Holy crap, dude, get to town right now. The urgency in his words was unmistakable, so I threw on some clothes and jumped into my old pickup truck. The drive was treacherous. The dense fog limited visibility to just a few feet, and I had to navigate carefully. Town was about 20 minutes away, but I hadn't even made it halfway when I slammed on the brakes. In the dim glow of my headlights, I saw it, a figure hovering a foot above the ground. It had enormous outstretched wings and an ethereal glow that bathed it in a golden light. For a moment, I thought I was looking at an angel. Its appearance was mesmerizing. Long, flowing hair, flawless skin, and a robe that seemed to shimmer in the faint light. But as I looked closer, dread crept in. The robe was stained with dark, crimson patches, and behind it lay the mangled remains of a body. My stomach churned as I realized it was one of my neighbors, their body torn apart as though by wild animals. Bite marks and deep gashes covered what was left of them. This was no angel. Instinct took over. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, intending to get away. But the creature's piercing screech froze me in place. It fell to the ground, limp. Shaking, I got out of the truck and rummaged through the back, praying I still had my hunting rifle. My hands trembled as I loaded a single bullet and approached cautiously. The creature twitched slightly, and without hesitation, I pulled the trigger. The screeching stopped. Breathing heavily, I climbed back into my truck and drove toward town. The closer I got, the louder a strange, melodic chorus grew. It was hauntingly beautiful but undercut by the unmistakable sound of distant screams. As I entered the town square, the source of the noise became clear. People had gathered, faces alight with wonder, gazing upward. They didn't hear the screams, or perhaps they chose to ignore them. I shouted a warning, but it was too late. The expressions of awe and joy on their faces twisted into masks of terror as the truth revealed itself. The radiant beings descending from the sky were no saviors. They were harbingers of destruction. Chaos erupted, and I stood frozen in disbelief, powerless to stop what was unfolding. The line between salvation and annihilation had never seemed so thin. I've attended 2 sermons since discovering the back room of One Light Church. The services have changed for me. I no longer focus on the piano or the pastor's voice. Instead, I sit quietly, enveloped by the church's comforting warmth. While sitting, I've begun to hear a rhythmic thumping, like a heartbeat. I can't determine its source. Is it mine, Margaret's, or something else entirely? For now, I don't need to know. I simply listen. I still hold the key to the room behind the pulpit. Someday, when I am ready, I will enter it to spend my final days there. Girls have gone missing in my town. Hello, everyone. I need to share something troubling that's been happening in my small town. Before diving in, let me give you some context. I live in a close-knit community where everyone knows everyone. It's the kind of place where a casserole from a neighbor is a welcome gift, and not getting one might mean you're not fitting in. Most of us are farmers, and we've built our lives around Sunday church gatherings, town events, and kids playing safely outside. It was a peaceful life, until March 23rd. That morning, 9-year-old Anna Moore's parents went to wake her and discovered something horrifying. Her room looked almost the same as the night before. Insect books scattered on the floor, papers and clothes cluttering her desk, and unfinished homework lying about. But her bed was empty. Her blankets were in place, as if she'd simply vanished. Her favorite butterfly plush was torn apart, with its wings arranged carefully on her pillow. A drawer from her dresser was open, and a few clothes were missing. Anna was a bright, friendly girl who loved insects. She'd often be found chasing butterflies or marveling at beetles, even roaches. Babysitting her was always a joy. I'll never forget her mother's scream that morning. I was out walking some dogs when I heard it, raw and piercing. It reminded me of the sound a rabbit makes when it's in mortal danger. A scream that doesn't sound human. Anna's father and older brother searched for her every night, armed with shotguns. They'd end their long, fruitless hunts at my father's bar, their faces etched with despair. Words like defeated don't capture their anguish. There's no term strong enough. Then, on May 8th, it happened again. This time, it was Calla Dollinger. She and her twin sister, Marie, were 17 and beloved by the entire town. Calla had a radiant personality and a voice that lit up every gathering. She disappeared while camping with friends. According to Ben, her ex-boyfriend, She had gone back to her car to retrieve something but never returned. The search for Calla uncovered chilling clues. Scraps of her clothing, strands of her black hair snagged on branches, and her signature red heart-shaped sunglasses shattered. The search party reported hearing her voice, sweet as ever, calling out to them. But each time they approached, it seemed to retreat farther into the woods. Mary was devastated. On the last day of school, when I tried to offer my condolences, she pushed me down. "I hope you're next, Nola," she spat, her voice trembling with grief. "Bring her back." I don't blame her. Calla was her twin, her other half. Losing her would have felt like losing a part of herself. The pain of these disappearances has rippled through the entire town. The close-knit fabric of our community is unraveling, and no one knows who or what is responsible. We're left clinging to memories, searching for answers, and praying for an end to the nightmare. The children, the families, everyone who had gathered in the town square, they were all gone. People I had known, people I had loved, were taken from this world in the most brutal way. But it wasn't by angels. There was nothing holy about what happened there. After the last soul had been taken, those things dispersed. The official statement said it was an oil explosion, but I know the truth. It wasn't an accident. It was something darker, something hidden in plain sight. Whatever those creatures were, they're still out there, lurking in the shadows of the woods, waiting for another chance. Sometimes, I think I catch glimpses of them in the darkness, their presence lingering just beyond my vision, watching, waiting. "Esling, have you even heard a single word?" she said. Orla's voice broke through Isling's thoughts, tinged with a sharpness that had become all too familiar. She spoke with the subtle edge of her new friends, the ones she was slowly choosing over Isling. They stood across the room, clustered together by the exhibit on human evolution, their laughter faintly echoing in the polished wooden halls of the Skathleen Museum. This wasn't new. These moments of tension had been building for months. Orla had been Isling's closest friend since they started secondary school, and together they had dreamed of taking on the world, school, college, and the life beyond it. They had spun wild fantasies of fame and success, weaving dreams that felt as tangible as the air around them. But those dreams had faded. Orla didn't indulge in them anymore. She had become consumed by the fear of being left out, desperate to fit in with the more popular girls. Every glance at them, every effort to join their conversations about the latest trends, seemed to pull her further away. Now Orla picked fights over trivial things, as if searching for an excuse to end their friendship. And Aisling could feel it, like a ship slowly drifting out of reach. "Take a guess, Orla," Aisling muttered, her voice low but firm, though she doubted Orla was listening. The children, the families, everyone who had gathered in the town square, they were all gone. People I had known, people I had loved, were taken from this world in the most brutal way. But it wasn't by angels. There was nothing holy about what happened there. After the last soul had been taken, those things dispersed. The official statement said it was an oil explosion, but I know the truth. It wasn't an accident. It was something darker, something hidden in plain sight. Whatever those creatures were, they're still out there, lurking in the shadows of the woods, waiting for another chance. Sometimes, I think I catch glimpses of them in the darkness, their presence lingering just beyond my vision. Watching, waiting. "Aisling, have you even heard a single word?" she said. Orla's voice broke through Aisling's thoughts, tinged with a sharpness that had become all too familiar. She spoke with the subtle edge of her new friends, the ones she was slowly choosing over Aisling. They stood across the room, clustered together by the exhibit on human evolution, their laughter faintly echoing in the polished wooden halls of the Skathleen Museum. This wasn't new. These moments of tension had been building for months. Orla had been Aisling's closest friend since they started secondary school, and together they had dreamed of taking on the world, school, college, and the life beyond it. They had spun wild fantasies of fame and success, weaving dreams that felt as tangible as the air around them. But those dreams had faded. Orla didn't indulge in them anymore. She had become consumed by the fear of being left out, desperate to fit in with the more popular girls. Every glance at them, every effort to join their conversations about the latest trends, seemed to pull her further away. Now Orla picked fights over trivial things, as if searching for an excuse to end their friendship, and Aisling could feel it, like a ship slowly drifting out of reach. "Take a guess, Orla," Aisling muttered, her voice low but firm, though she doubted Orla was listening. The children, the families, everyone who had gathered in the town square, they were all gone. People I had known, people I had loved, were taken from this world in the most brutal way. But it wasn't by angels. There was nothing holy about what happened there. After the last soul had been taken, those things dispersed. The official statement said it was an oil explosion. But I know the truth. It wasn't an accident. It was something darker, something hidden in plain sight. Whatever those creatures were, they're still out there, lurking in the shadows of the woods, waiting for another chance. Sometimes, I think I catch glimpses of them in the darkness, their presence lingering just beyond my vision. Watching. Waiting. "Aisling, have you even heard a single word she said?" Orla's voice broke through Aisling's thoughts, tinged with a sharpness that had become all too familiar. She spoke with the subtle edge of her new friends, the ones she was slowly choosing over Aisling. They stood across the room, clustered together by the exhibit on human evolution, their laughter faintly echoing in the polished wooden halls of the Skathleen Museum. This wasn't new. These moments of tension had been building for months. Orla had been Aisling's closest friend since they started secondary school, and together they had dreamed of taking on the world, school, college, and the life beyond it. They had spun wild fantasies of fame and success, weaving dreams that felt as tangible as the air around them. But those dreams had faded. Orla didn't indulge in them anymore. She had become consumed by the fear of being left out, desperate to fit in with the more popular girls. Every glance at them, every effort to join their conversations about the latest trends, seemed to pull her further away. Now Orla picked fights over trivial things, as if searching for an excuse to end their friendship. And Aisling could feel it, like a ship slowly drifting out of reach. "Take a guess, Orla," Aisling muttered, her voice low but firm, though she doubted Orla was listening. The children, the families, everyone who had gathered in the town square, they were all gone. People I had known, people I had loved, were taken from this world in the most brutal way. But it wasn't by angels. There was nothing holy about what happened there. After the last soul had been taken, those things dispersed. The official statement said it was an oil explosion, but I know the truth. It wasn't an accident. It was something darker, something hidden in plain sight. Whatever those creatures were, they're still out there, lurking in the shadows of the woods, waiting for another chance. Sometimes, I think I catch glimpses of them in the darkness, their presence lingering just beyond my vision. Watching. Waiting. "Aisling, have you even heard a single word she said?" Orla's voice broke through Aisling's thoughts, tinged with a sharpness that had become all too familiar. She spoke with the subtle edge of her new friends, the ones she was slowly choosing over Aisling. They stood across the room, clustered together by the exhibit on human evolution, their laughter faintly echoing in the polished wooden halls of the Skathleen Museum. This wasn't new. These moments of tension had been building for months. Orla had been Aisling's closest friend since they started secondary school, and together they had dreamed of taking on the world, school, college, and the life beyond it. They had spun wild fantasies of fame and success, weaving dreams that felt as tangible as the air around them. But those dreams had faded. Orla didn't indulge in them anymore. She had become consumed by the fear of being left out, desperate to fit in with the more popular girls. Every glance at them, every effort to join their conversations about the latest trends, seemed to pull her further away. Now Orla picked fights over trivial things, as if searching for an excuse to end their friendship. And Aisling could feel it, like a ship slowly drifting out of reach. Take a guess, Orla, Isling muttered, her voice low but firm, though she doubted Orla was listening. The children, the families, everyone who had gathered in the town square, they were all gone. People I had known, people I had loved, were taken from this world in the most brutal way. But it wasn't by angels. There was nothing holy about what happened there. After the last soul had been taken, those things dispersed. The official statement said it was an oil explosion, but I know the truth. It wasn't an accident. It was something darker, something hidden in plain sight. Whatever those creatures were, they're still out there, lurking in the shadows of the woods, waiting for another chance. Sometimes I think I catch glimpses of them in the darkness, their presence lingering just beyond my vision. Watching, waiting. Isling, have you even heard a single word she said? Orla's voice broke through Isling's thoughts, tinged with a sharpness that had become all too familiar. She spoke with the subtle edge of her new friends, the ones she was slowly choosing over Isling. They stood across the room, clustered together by the exhibit on human evolution, their laughter faintly echoing in the polished wooden halls of the Gleam Museum. This wasn't new. These moments of tension had been building for months. Orla had been Isling's closest friend since they started secondary school, and together they had dreamed of taking on the world, school, college, and the life beyond it. They had spun wild fantasies of fame and success, weaving dreams that felt as tangible as the air around them. But those dreams had faded. Orla didn't indulge in them anymore. She had become consumed by the fear of being left out, desperate to fit in with the more popular girls. Every glance at them, every effort to join their conversations about the latest trends, seemed to pull her further away. Now, Orla picked fights over trivial things, as if searching for an excuse to end a friendship, and Isling could feel it, like a ship slowly drifting out of reach. Take a guess, Orla, Isling muttered, her voice low but firm, though she doubted Orla was listening. The children, the families, everyone who had gathered in the town square, they were all gone. People I had known, people I had loved, were taken from this world in the most brutal way. But it wasn't by angels. There was nothing holy about what happened there. After the last soul had been taken, those things dispersed. The official statement said it was an oil explosion, but I know the truth. It wasn't an accident. It was something darker, something hidden in plain sight. Whatever those creatures were, they're still out there, lurking in the shadows of the woods, waiting for another chance. Sometimes I think I catch glimpses of them in the darkness, their presence lingering just beyond my vision. Watching, waiting. Isling, have you even heard a single word she said? Orla's voice broke through Isling's thoughts, tinged with a sharpness that had become all too familiar. She spoke with the subtle edge of her new friends, the ones she was slowly choosing over Isling. They stood across the room, clustered together by the exhibit on human evolution, their laughter faintly echoing in the polished wooden halls of the Gleam Museum. This wasn't new. These moments of tension had been building for months. Orla had been Isling's closest friend since they started secondary school, and together they had dreamed of taking on the world, school, college, and the life beyond it. They had spun wild fantasies of fame and success, weaving dreams that felt as tangible as the air around them. But those dreams had faded. Orla didn't indulge in them anymore. She had become consumed by the fear of being left out, desperate to fit in with the more popular girls. Every glance at them, every effort to join their conversations about the latest trends, seemed to pull her further away. Now, Orla picked fights over trivial things, as if searching for an excuse to end their friendship, and Isling could feel it, like a ship slowly drifting out of reach. Take a guess, Orla, Isling muttered, her voice low but firm, though she doubted Orla was listening. The children, the families, everyone who had gathered in the town square, they were all gone. People I had known, people I had loved, were taken from this world in the most brutal way. But it wasn't by angels. There was nothing holy about what happened there. After the last soul had been taken, those things dispersed. The official statement said it was an oil explosion, but I know the truth. It wasn't an accident. It was something darker, something hidden in plain sight. Whatever those creatures were, they're still out there, lurking in the shadows of the woods, waiting for another chance. Sometimes, I think I catch glimpses of them in the darkness, their presence lingering just beyond my vision. Watching, waiting, Aisling, have you even heard a single word she said? Orla's voice broke through Aisling's thoughts, tinged with a sharpness that had become all too familiar. She spoke with the subtle edge of her new friends, the one she was slowly choosing over Aisling. They stood across the room, clustered together by the exhibit on human evolution, their laughter faintly echoing in the polished wooden halls of the Skathleen Museum. This wasn't new. These moments of tension had been building for months. Orla had been Aisling's closest friend since they started secondary school, and together they had dreamed of taking on the world, school, college, and the life beyond it. They had spun wild fantasies of fame and success, weaving dreams that felt as tangible as the air around them. But those dreams had faded. Orla didn't indulge in them anymore. She had become consumed by the fear of being left out, desperate to fit in with the more popular girls. Every glance at them, every effort to join their conversations about the latest trends, seemed to pull her further away. Now, Orla picked fights over trivial things, as if searching for an excuse to end their friendship, and Aisling could feel it, like a ship slowly drifting out of reach. Take a guess, Orla, Aisling muttered, her voice low but firm, though she doubted Orla was listening. The children, the families, everyone who had gathered in the town square, they were all gone. People I had known, people I had loved, were taken from this world in the most brutal way. But it wasn't by angels. There was nothing holy about what happened there. After the last soul had been taken, those things dispersed. The official statement said it was an oil explosion. But I know the truth. It wasn't an accident. It was something darker, something hidden in plain sight. Whatever those creatures were, they're still out there, lurking in the shadows of the woods, waiting for another chance. Sometimes, I think I catch glimpses of them in the darkness, their presence lingering just beyond my vision. Watching, waiting. Aisling, have you even heard a single word she said? Orla's voice broke through Aisling's thoughts, tinged with a sharpness that had become all too familiar. She spoke with the subtle edge of her new friends, the ones she was slowly choosing over Aisling. They stood across the room, clustered together by the exhibit on human evolution, their laughter faintly echoing in the polished wooden halls of the Skathleen Museum. This wasn't new. These moments of tension had been building for months. Orla had been Aisling's closest friend since they started secondary school, and together they had dreamed of taking on the world, school, college, and the life beyond it. They had spun wild fantasies of fame and success, weaving dreams that felt as tangible as the air around them. But those dreams had faded. Orla didn't indulge in them anymore. She had become consumed by the fear of being left out, desperate to fit in with the more popular girls. Every glance at them, every effort to join their conversations about the latest trends, seemed to pull her further away. Now Orla picked fights over trivial things, as if searching for an excuse to end their friendship. And Aisling could feel it, like a ship slowly drifting out of reach. Take a guess, Orla, Aisling muttered, her voice low but firm, though she doubted Orla was listening. Aisling watched the scene breathlessly as the man lifted the helmet, examining it closely. His eyes were stern, and as he stared intently into the many eye lenses of the helmet, a curious light formed on his forehead. A silvery tattoo-like pattern formed, not unlike a Celtic knot, four-cornered and glowing softly. Aisling felt a third mind now, a human mind press against hers and the Fardiver's, but with the gentleness of a nurse assessing injury. A sadness hung over the eyes of the man as he seemed to understand the Fardiver's fate. He handed the helmet to one of his men, ordering him to do something with it. He spoke with a language that sounded like Gaelic, but was possessed of a syntax and vocabulary that Aisling did not recognize from any variant she had ever learned of during the course of her education. She could discern no meaning from the words. The scene began to bleed away now as the far diver's consciousness ceased completely. The knowledge of what became of the helmet, of where it traveled during the course of deep time, and how it ended up in the museum so well preserved, was lost to the eons. Aisling's mind expanded as her brain suddenly felt relieved of a massive burden, her mind now her own once again. She ripped the helmet from her head, gasping and shuddering with fear. Her nose was drenched in blood, and her head felt as if she had been bludgeoned. No longer caring about attendance of her school trip, she ran out of the room, up the stairs and straight out of the building, clutching her nose as she went. As she cast fleeting glances at the exhibits she passed on her way, a thought kept repeating itself with frantic insistence. Fake, 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 fake. 3 days later, Aisling sat by a jetty, looking out to sea. It was a clear night, serene and cool, illuminated in silver by the light of a full moon. Aisling had been thinking deeply on the things she had seen through the eyes of the far diver. It had taken her days to process it all, to try and find some semblance of sense in those alien vistas, both wondrous and terrifying in equal measure. She had no way of knowing how much of it was real beyond what she felt was real. That was to say, all of what she had seen. The powers that be saw fit to cover up Earth's true history with lies about our evolution, lies about life on Earth and beyond, lies about everything, the very foundations of all that is known. As to why was completely unknown to her. She had no idea on where to even begin her search. Aisling had always felt that she was born in the wrong time, the wrong place, that she was not long for this world. A part of her mind was irreversibly changed by her experience with the helm of the far diver. She was stricken with a deep and gnawing curiosity, cursed with an insatiable need to know and explore everything. But alas, she was born too late to live through the dark and wondrous struggles of humanity's true history, born far too early to have the means of exploring the stars in the way the far diver did. Landlocked on modern Earth, and with no way to sate her curiosity, she turned to the mysterious museum owner, in the hopes that she could experience the visions of the far diver once again. When Aisling told the museum staff of her experience with the owner and the helmet in his private collection in the retired exhibits room, she was regarded with the same judgmental gaze and mocking tone that she had endured for her whole life. The owner is a man in his 70s, and he's been residing in his holiday home in Spain for the past year, said the receptionist, as if she were a teacher explaining something to a hated student. And we certainly don't have a retired exhibits room, nor do we have any helmet matching your description. I hate to ask, but could I please just take a look? The receptionist answered a phone call, ending the conversation. I'll just find out myself so. Aisling entered the museum, loitering around the exhibits closest to the fire exit door where the supposed owner had taken her. They would likely have CCTV. Someone would surely see her, but if she could get to the bottom, if she could just get a glimpse or find some other way in. She walked briskly, trying to appear as if she were simply looking for a restroom, but she was too anxious to maintain the facade. The second she touched the door, she ran, bounding down the stairs 3 at a time. She reached the door of the retired exhibit room, locked tight. Hey, come back up here now, or I'm calling the guards. The security guard would be there in seconds. The door was locked tight, with no other avenues of access. Peering through the dusty window in the door, Aisling was met with the sight of the retired exhibit room as she knew it. This time, however, the room was drenched in the harsh light of several floodlights. They were focused on a central point, and she recognized the basalt plinth that held the helm of the far diver. Milling about the room were official-looking men, adorned in dark green suits and wielding scientific-looking instruments and tools that she did not recognize. Before she could observe any further, she was seized roughly by the security guard and dragged up the stairs by her forearm. Who were they? Who were they? She demanded, desperate to know what other secret she had now stumbled into. Her demands were met only with silence. The guard marched her to the front door, and with a simple statement of "You're barred. Leave now or I'll call the guarde," left her standing in the rain-soaked street. Her mind reeled with what she had seen. She had sought answers in coming to the museum, but now she was left with more questions than ever before. Who were the men in the dark green suits? What did they want with the helm? And why were the museum staff being so secretive about it all? As she walked in the rain, she observed the town all about her. She looked to the nearby sea, to the cliffs around the town's valley, into the blackness of the Scathflean wilderness. Not for the first time, and certainly not for the last, she began to wonder just how much of it all was truly real.